Good afternoon, Durham, North Carolina. Welcome today to our City Council work session on Thursday, November 10th, 2022, here in Chambers at 1 p.m. At this time, I would like to announce that we have a birthday before we call the roll for our newest member of the City Council. So happy birthday to Councilwoman Hyman, Dr. Hyman. And we also have another birthday in our inner chambers working, Lakeisha Griffin, so we give a shout out to her as well. And with that, I think that Councilman Williams is he's running a little late, but Madam Clerk, if you will call the roll.
Mayor O'Neill.
I am present.
Mayor Pro Tem Middleton.
I'm here.
Councilmember Caballero.
Here.
Councilmember Freeman.
Present.
Councilmember Halsey Hyman.
Present.
Councilmember Johnson.
Here.
And Councilmember Williams will join us shortly.
Let's see. Thank you so much. I would like to, at this time, recognize any of my colleagues for announcements or comments. Councilwoman Freeman, Councilwoman Javier.
I was just saying
Caballero.
Halsey Hyman's hand. I just wanted
Okay.
to make sure.
All right, so we'll start on this end first and migrate across.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to take a moment and just say we made it through another election day, and I want to thank all of the candidates that stepped forward to serve in our community, and I want to congratulate them all for completing a race. I know how hard that could be, how difficult it is, and I want to thank each and every one of them, and that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem, did you have an announcement? Okay. The birthday girl.
Thank you, everyone, for the happy birthday. I wanted to just acknowledge that tomorrow is Veterans Day, and to honor all of our men and women who serve and continue service for our country. Happy Veterans Day to our people who are doing that here in Durham and through across the globe and the world. So just wanted to say Happy Veterans Day.
Thank you so much. I too would like to share my thanks to all who turned out to vote on yesterday. It's always a good day to have a day that one can vote. So thank you all for all the candidates for all their hard work, and we extend our congratulations to all those who were the victors. So with that being said, I think I'm gonna change it up. We're changing it up a little bit, you all. We're trying to find a rhythm that kind of has everybody involved. So Mayor Pro Tem, I'll turn it over to you at this point in time to get us through the reading of our agenda. So I'm putting you back on the spot for now.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Actually, I'm going to yield at this time for good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Your Honor, and to my honorable colleagues, everyone in the chamber and those that are watching remotely. At this time, I'm going to yield to our city manager for any priority items that she may have. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, and members of the Durham City Council. I have one priority item for you today, and it is agenda item number 13, approval of U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development Choice Neighborhoods Implementation CNI Grant Agreement. City Council is being asked to suspend the rules and vote during the work session so the mayor and Durham Housing Authority can execute and submit the CNI agreement to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development before their December 2nd, 2022 deadline. That is all I have for you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Manager. That is noted, and we will take action after we read the agenda into record for the day. I'm going to yield now to the city attorney for any priority items she may have. Good afternoon, Councilor.
Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem, Madam Mayor, members of the council. The city attorney's office has no priority items today.
Thank you very much. I'm going to now yield to our city clerk for any priority items. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. Good afternoon, Mayor and City Council members. The City Clerk's office has no priority items today.
Thank you so much. By my reckoning, there's only one item that requires action on the council. We will take that up after I read, with the mayor's permission, our administrative consent items and the rest of the agenda into the record.
Please proceed.
Thank you, ma'am. From the city clerk's office, item number 1, Durham City County Appearance Commission appointments. Item number 2, Safety and Wellness Task Force appointment. Item number 3, Recreation Advisory Commission appointment. Item number 4, Citizens Advisory Committee appointment. Item number 5, Durham Affordable Housing Implementation Committee appointment. Item number 6, Durham Board of Adjustment mayoral appointment. Item number 7, approval of city council minutes. Under departmental items from the city attorney's office, item number 8, ward redistricting. This will be a presentation. Under city manager's office, item number 9, American Rescue Plan Act ARPA project, the Pearson project kitchen renovation. Item number 10, American Rescue Plan Act ARPA project, Black Wall Street Hub for amplifying Durham's entrepreneur community. From the Community Development Department, item number 11, revised rules and procedures for the affordable housing bonus described in section 6.6 of the Unified Development Ordinance. Item number 12, contract with Open Table Ministry, Inc. for White Flag Non-Congregate Emergency Shelter and Supportive Services. Item number 13, approval of U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development Choice Neighborhoods Implementation Grant Agreement. That item's been asked to be taken up to suspend the rules and vote on by the city manager. Under the Fleet Management Department, item number 14, cooperative group purchase contract, 2-year rear load refuse trucks. Under General Services Department, item number 15, service contract with Arbormax Tree Service, LLC for right-of-way tree and stump removal services. I'm pulling that item. Item number 16, update to inform disposition and redevelopment of the property located at 505 West Chapel Hill Street. This is a presentation. Item number 17, second amendment to license agreement with American Towers, LLC for the Emergency Communications Department at Parkwood Tower. Item number 18, design build services with Monteith Construction Corporation for Fire and EMS Station 19. Under Public Works Department, item number 19, 5-year contract, bless you, 5-year contract for license support renewal between the City of Durham and Infrastructure Technologies, LLC, doing business as IT Pipes, LLC. Item number 20, municipal separate stormwater sewer system, MS4, inspections, SD-2021-06, amendment number 1. Under Technology Solutions Department, item number 21, contract with Avenu Government Systems, LLC for Novalis Land Development Office and Novalis Gate Software. Under the Water Management Department, item number 22, award of a construction contract to RES Environmental Operating Company, LLC for the Homeland and Aiken Stream Stabilization Project. Item number 23, award of a service contract to NGE Services, Inc. for the tree removal and mowing and utility easements project. I'm pulling that. Item number 24, professional services contract with Kimley Horn and Associates, Inc. for the West End Water and Sewer Rehabilitation Project, Phase 1. Item number 25, award of bid term contract for bulk water treatment plant chemicals to Penco, Inc. Item number 26, award of bid term contract for bulk water treatment plant chemicals to Univar Solutions, USA, Inc. Item number 27, amendment number 3, pardon me, to engineering services contract with Hazen and Sawyer for the Lake Mickey and Little River Raw Water Pump Station improvements. Item number 28, award of construction contract to Crowder Industrial Construction, LLC for the Lake Mickey and Little River Raw Water Pump Station improvements. Item number 29, award of bid term contract for bulk water treatment plant chemicals to Caris, LLC. Item number 30, professional services contract award to CDM Smith, Inc. for the FY23 miscellaneous waterline replacement project, Phase 1. Presentations from the city manager's office. Item number 31, affordable housing deep dive presentation on affordable housing and the law. Public hearings from the City County Planning Department. Item number 32, consolidated annexation, Guest Road and St. Albans Court. Item number 33, zoning map change, Durham Elementary School F. Item number 34, zoning map change, 1402 Holloway Street. Item number 35, consolidated annexation, rhododendron sewer and lots. Item number 36, zoning map change, NCCU 24/7 Collaborative Learning and Resource Center. That ends the reading of the agenda. Madam Clerk, by my reckoning, we have items number 15 and 23 pulled, and item number 13 that requires action.
Yes, sir.
You concur?
Yep.
All right. Colleagues, we've been asked by our city manager to suspend the rules to take action on item number 13. At this time, I will entertain a motion to suspend the rules.
So moved.
Second.
I hear a motion from Councilmember Caballero and a second from Her Honor. I'm going to ask that the rules are now suspended. I'm going to ask for a motion that to authorize the mayor to execute a Choice Neighborhoods Implementation Grant Agreement with the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development in the amount of $40 million for the redevelopment of the Durham Housing Authority's 519 East Main and Liberty Street apartment properties.
So moved.
Second.
I had a motion from Councilmember Williams, I believe, and I believe a second from Councilmember Johnson. Will you signify agreement by saying aye?
Aye.
Those opposed? Chair believes it was a unanimous vote, and it will be recorded as such. That item is adopted. Congratulations, by the way. That's a huge accomplishment for us.
Yes.
A good chunk of money, absolutely. Madam Mayor, I think that's all I've been charged with. Again, the items that have been pulled are 15 and 23. I yield back to you.
All right, thank you so much. I believe we may have one public comment speaker, Ms. Pat Harris, or is Ms. Pat Harris speaking on item 16? Okay, then we'll move right into our pulled items, will be our next item on the agenda, and we will start with the two items that have been pulled by you, Mayor Pro Tem, 15 and 23.
Thank you, ma'am. Is staff going to be physically here or okay.
Good afternoon. Staff is available online, I believe. If not, I am ready to take the questions. Gina Probst, General Services Department.
Good to see you. Thank
Good
you.
afternoon.
Who is online, theoretically, possibly?
Our Urban Forestry Manager, Alex Johnson, is participating remotely. However, if that's not available, I am here.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Not many questions on it. It's pretty straightforward, but I was intrigued reading this particular applicant was deemed non-compliant in terms of a good faith effort to honor our MUB goals, but it was deemed that it would be in the city's best interest to move forward with it. I had a question about capacity, and the reason why I say this is because one of the justifications for using contractors in situations like this is that it won't stretch the city's capacity because of their added personnel, expert equipment, capacity, and that lessens the city's load. But on the other hand, one of the reasons that this company, one of the reasons cited for this company's inability or difficulty in meeting diversity goals is its size. It's under 50 employees. So it seemed to me was interesting that, I guess the question is, how is a company at the same time too small to be diverse, but yet large enough to make a substantive impact on our work schedule as a city? I think this contract was for 120 days. I think about 4 months for Arbormax, and it was cited that they've got specialty equipment and cranes and stuff. It seems like a pretty small company to have that kind of capacity, but yet they're too small to be diverse. So could you kind of just reconcile that for me?
So there's a couple things going on with this contract. One is the appeal process that occurred for the UBE goals, and the type of work that this contractor provides is turnkey, so there's not many sub-opportunities. So when you look at that, and then that is one aspect of it. So the work that they do is in-house with their own small forces with the equipment that they have. So the subcontracting opportunities are remote. Then you look at the size of the company itself, which is a smaller company, and there is, when you look at the prime company and their workforce, I believe their total number of employees is 18, and you can see there is some diversity in their workforce of the prime firm itself.
Okay. That makes sense to me. I guess what I'm curious about is, and I've seen that the line a number of times about, it won't be so taxing on the city's capacity to if we use these folk. But I'm wondering, because I've seen it a few times, and I'm looking at some of the sizes of these companies, I'm just wondering, I don't, as I operationalize that line as a decision maker, I don't want to just start seeing that as just kind of something we say all the time. If in fact they have specialized capacity and abilities, fine, but I guess I'm wondering, are we really that, if we were to do this in-house, I mean, the contract's for 120 days, how much would it really throw off our other work in reality?
Based on our evaluation, that the type of equipment that Arbormax brings to the table is equipment that we currently do not have the same type of equipment. And the locations were specifically identified because of their complexity versus the other routine work that our department does. We are down 3 staff members right now, 2 positions that have been very difficult to fill despite all the best efforts because of the competition in the workforce right now for the type of skills that come from working in a boom and you know, linemen and line women compete for. So we're at a little bit of a disadvantage when it comes to also filling our current positions that we've actively been recruiting, including going to schools, working with community colleges, going to Alamance County that offers a specialized class for tree services. So it's a way to also augment the work that we already have on our routine scope of work to do this work that has accumulated because of our staffing resources limitations as well.
Is there somebody from Arbormax here?
Not on the line, I do not believe, but we can make them available for any follow-up questions at Monday night or any questions that we can provide in response.
You might be able to answer. I don't know that I'll need that much involvement with this one. They've been in business for 14 years?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Do you have any idea of over that 14 years, how diverse their workforce has been? Has this been a persistent issue with them, or?
I can't speak to their past. I can speak to the information that was provided at the time that they bid on the project. I can follow up.
Sure. All right, that's all. Thank you so much. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
All right, we turn to the next pulled item, which I believe was item 23. Mayor Pro Tem.
All right.
Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem, members of council, Don Greeley, Water Management.
Good afternoon, Don. Thank you. Good to see you. Madam Mayor, if Don looks nervous, it's because I told him that we were seriously considering taking his building and making that City Hall, putting the water department over here. So we'll excuse him today. Don, good to see you. My questions about this issue, this item, are similar to my previous ones. This is a 20-year, 23-year-old company, roughly?
I believe so.
And I think that in, at least by my reading of the materials, they've got 1 black employee. And I get, well, my first question is similar to the other one. One of the reasons that was given as a challenge to their diversity, as a challenge for their diversity is because they were a small company, under 50 employees. But yet another reason for them being a good company was their capacity. And again, so I'm just wondering, how can a company be too small to be diverse, but yet at the same time large enough to make a substantive impact on our workload? And you may not be able to answer that, but and the reason why I'm asking is because moving forward as I read these, I don't want to just cast votes reflexively as a matter of form. I want the language to mean something. And I'm increasingly seeing this corridor being navigated more. Well, we're challenged because we're too small, but we're good for you because we're big enough to take work from the city. And and we look to you, our department heads and managers to kind of help us, Sherpa us through this stuff. So could you explain to me how I can reconcile that?
Very similar to what you heard from Gina Prost and General Services on the previous item for discussion. It is a relatively small company. They have 12 employees. In talking with the owner, their percentage of minorities within their company has been larger in the past. It's oscillated back and forth over time. They do recruit in that area. But once again, we encourage, when we see statistics like this, for water management, we reach out and talk to them about not just what's in the questionnaire, but also here are the other avenues that you can pursue that we're aware of within the city to reach out to try to improve your diversity going forward.
Okay, and this is a real question. Will this be, they are a small company. Will this be the only contract they're working on, or do they have other business going on simultaneously?
This is a pretty large contract, so I would imagine, we can ask and get that answer, but this will probably keep them pretty busy.
Yeah, because I would imagine that if they're a small company, there's only so much capacity they can have. And if they're presented to us as a council as being able to substantively lessen our workload and give us more freedom and agility, then to me that says something about their capacity. But if they're 12 people, could they possibly be doing could they really be impacting our workload that much and still have other business if this weren't their sole? And you've already said you don't know, but that's something I would like to understand more, how these small companies can be so impactful on, as I read, giving the city more agility and more flexibility, but they're small, so we can't get a lot of black people because we're small, or Latino people are small, and at the same time occupy this kind of super capacity, lessening the city workload space. That's becoming more difficult for me as a decision maker to reconcile that. So I would like to know what the other contracts they're working on, and how do they actually, how are they actually able to make what we say that they're going to free up the city reality when there's 12 folk, presumably with other business going on?
Right. Well, we'll pursue that and have an answer to you.
All right. Other than that, I think that's all. And the other thing is, if you would ask them, is there a representative from the company here?
No.
No. Okay. 23 years is a good amount of time to be in business. 23 years, one black employee. Now, I'd be curious as to what their hiring record has been over those 23 years, since it's not a new company. I understand they're small, but they've been around for a minute. That's it. Thank you. Good to see you.
We'll pursue those.
We're coming for that building. Thanks. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I yield back.
Welcome anytime.
Thank you. I believe those are all of our pulled items, and now we will go into our departmental items and our presentation. So we're going to, like I said, involve more of my colleagues in the actual running of the meeting itself. So I am now going to yield to Councilwoman Johnson, who will be leading us on item number 8, which is the presentation by our attorney, Kimberly Rayberg, on ward redistricting. I yield to you, Councilwoman Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I will just go ahead and yield to our city attorney for our presentation.
Okay, good afternoon. It's kind of odd being down here, but we'll see how this goes. So as you all know, because of the many emails that I have sent you over the last 6 months, we need to establish new boundaries for the city's 3 districted wards. So this is just a presentation to kind of condense and go over a little bit of where we are now, why we need to do it, just kind of give you a little bit of perspective before we actually present some maps to you today. All right, so our election wards are established in the Durham City Charter, Section 4, and that provision, as you can see, a lot of words in the charter addressing this issue But basically, we are supposed to conduct a analysis and redistricting of our wards within 6 months of receiving new census results. As you all know, there was a census conducted in 2020. There were a lot of challenges with that census. And so all of that data came to localities and the states in a delayed fashion, much more delayed than it typically is. But we ultimately did get it, and so that's why we're here today. You can also engage in this process, just for your information, anytime you feel like the process needs to be addressed. So if the city's growing very rapidly in one area that you can see, you could also kind of on your own initiative engage in a redistricting process. But we're doing this today because we know we have new numbers. And let's take a look at those. All right, so the first Census Bureau results were issued in April 26th, on April 26th of 2020. Those results were finalized so that you all could actually use the data to engage in a redistricting process on September 16th of 2001. So we're running a little bit behind the 8 ball. Clearly, we're not within 6 months of September 16th. However, there's that charter provision again. Theoretically, we should have redistricted by March 16th, but you all know that we had some initial discussions about this, and we wanted to get some input from our community on this process as well. So there's no penalty for the city for failure to adopt a ward adjustment ordinance by March 16th. So that's helpful, that we're not dealing with a legal penalty. The next ward election that we have isn't until November 2025 anyway, so we're well out in front of that particular time frame. I don't believe any of you all have been through this process before, since the last time that we did it was 2011. So this is a new process for you all. We wanted you all to be able to take in lots and lots of information and be able to process some of that, get some historical perspective on where Durham has been and where maybe Durham might be going. And so we took that extra time. That moderate delay in completing the redistricting process did give us the additional time to do some research. I shared a research memorandum over the summer that had been conducted by one of our summer law clerks who did a fantastic job of going back to 1998 when the city's council was actually reduced from 13 members to the current 7. And we provided a follow-up memorandum as well on kind of where some of those initiatives were coming from. So I think we've gotten a good amount of historical data to kind of inform this process. And that moderate delay also allowed the city administration to set up an informational website for our populace here in Durham, for them to understand what the redistricting process is and solicit any feedback. So they were able to submit comments on the website, which was really helpful. That website, I believe, went live in early September and right after Labor Day, and it will be live through your vote until your vote on November 21st. So what is redistricting? What is this process? Redistricting is the actual redrawing of electoral district lines that are used to elect those of you who are ward representatives. The process is used to maintain a proportionate number of voters between the districts. The Equal Protection Clause of the U.S. Constitution in the 14th Amendment requires that the districts be substantially equal in population so that each person's vote counts about the same. And because the city of Durham has 3 council seats that are elected using a ward election system, the city must engage in this process after each decennial census. So what is our ward election system? It can be a little bit of a mystery because the districts throughout the state, in municipalities throughout the state, do vary somewhat. In Durham, since 2001, as I previously mentioned, we have been divided into 3 electoral wards. The city charter, again, provides for a council that's comprised of a mayor and 6 council members. 3 council members are elected at large and may reside anywhere within the city limits. And the next general election for city council members who are in at-large seats will be held on November 7th of 2023. So that's next year's municipal election. And then 3 council members are designated as ward members and must reside within the ward that they represent. Now, a couple things that are important to remember about our wards, which is kind of unique to Durham. Ward council members are elected by all city voters. So although there's a residency requirement for the city council person themselves, all the voters in the city do get to vote for each ward seat. And so wards do not affect where a resident votes or which candidates a resident can vote for. And again, the next general election for city council ward seats will be held on November 4th, 2025. So what were our results? After the 2020 census, our total population was reported as 283,506 Durhamites. That was an increase of, I think my number's wrong here, I think it was more like 21%, not 24%. But what we do know is that the population growth was not distributed evenly across the 3 wards. So how do we determine our ideal ward size? Well, it's pretty basic math. 283,506 people divided by 3 is an ideal ward size of 94,502 people per ward. So the ward should contain roughly equivalent populations. We know that from the 14th Amendment provision. And they should be within 5% of that ideal ward size, so that 94,000 figure. So here's where we are. Based on our current ward maps, Ward 1 has a population of 89,169. Ward 2 has a population of 107,255, and Ward 3 is at 87,082 people. So they're out of whack. We need to redraw them.
We turn up too. Neglected.
So what are the legal parameters of redistricting? We know that we need to balance the population between our 3 wards. We need to try to honor our current ward boundaries. So we don't want to just take our map and, even if we comply with kind of the equivalency requirements, totally make the map different, like have Ward 1 be on a geographically different side of the city. That would be weird. So we want to try to honor kind of where we are in terms of an existing map. And we also want to try not to split our precinct boundaries if we can, to reduce confusion for voters. There are some additional criteria that are typically factored into let's say sound redistricting practices, because as you all know, redistricting is kind of a hot issue and not everybody embraces all of the same principles, but here's what the experts advise. Contiguity, compactness, preserve communities of interest, and avoid pairing incumbents. So contiguity, meaning that you don't want to create islands with your districts, right? You want the geography within a district to be fairly attached at all points to the district that it's in our case, the ward that it's in. Compactness is kind of a similar principle. You don't want it to be long and skinny. Those salamander maps that you see, which is where we kind of get that terminology, gerrymandering, some of the crazy maps that you see. You want them to be geographically compact. You want them to make sense. You want them to be in close proximity. Everybody within the ward should be somewhat within close proximity to one another. Preserving communities of interest, particular neighborhoods, particular interest in terms of ethnicity maybe, heritage maybe, commitment to a certain area of the city. Those are communities of interest. And of course, when we're redistricting, we want to avoid pairing one or more of you who are ward council members in the same district after the maps are drawn. We kind of want to keep you separate so that you're not forced to run against one another in the same district. And we also want to consider where our future growth may be. It's pretty important. So again, this is our current map, and you all do have a PDF in iLegislate where you could kind of blow this picture up and look at it closely if you needed to. Also, I provided earlier in one of the emails a link to the city's website so you all could get on there. And I think a couple of you did get on there to play, so to speak, see how the map works and how residents would have encountered the map. I had tremendous help from Kelly Doss, who is a GIS analyst, in developing some proposals for you all to consider as alternative maps or redrawn maps. So again, here's where we're starting from. And you can see on the right side of that table the variance, and that means that percentage off that the figures currently in the ward are from that ideal ward size. So this is option one that Kelly has drawn for you all. Reapportionment option one, again, takes that 283,506 population. And in this map, she's gotten pretty close to that 94,000 and some change ideal ward size. You can see that the variance numbers are very, very low for each of the 3 wards. And this is option 2. Slightly more variation in the numbers. I think what she has probably done here, and I believe Kelly is available on the Zoom link, so you all may have an opportunity to ask her some questions if you have questions regarding how she came up with these configurations. She can address that. But I think what she's trying to do is Ward 1 is probably a slightly slower growing ward than the other 2, and Ward 3 looks like maybe she's creating a little buffer for Ward 3 to have some rapid growth there. All right, a little bit more about that website that I mentioned earlier. Again, it was launched on September 6th of this year. It will continue to receive public comments about the 2 ward reapportionment options that we've shared with you today until November 21st, which is the date of the council meeting at which you all will vote on a reapportionment plan. And as of the time that I had to put this into the agenda system, these are the comments that we had gathered from the website. Seemed to be a little split. 2 votes for option 2, 2 votes, or I'm sorry, no, option 2 has 2 votes, option 1 has 1, and then the other 2 comments are just kind of general comments thanking you all for engaging in the process and putting that information out there. But that is redistricting in a nutshell. I'm going to stop here and make sure that you all don't have some questions regarding the information we've already covered.
I do have a question.
Councilmember Hyman, sure.
So as we know, Durham is, people are moving to Durham, right? So as we continue to grow, do you go back to the table? Like, how often do you have to look at this redistricting?
So by law, you have to do it after each decennial census. So we won't have another one until 2030, right? But as I mentioned earlier, and I kind of got a sideways glance from a couple of you, like, what do you mean we can do this anytime? Yeah, I mean, if you feel like the city is experiencing very rapid growth and it would be more appropriate to address it before we get to 2030, you could surely engage in this process before that time. Using the same principles, kind of conducting the same analysis of the districts where they are, where the growth is happening, trying to get balance. But it is a lot of investment of time on your part, staff time, that sort of thing, to do it very often. But 2030, we'll do it again for sure. Madam Mayor.
Sort of related, but not really on topic, but one that has been raised by some members of the public to me directly, and I'm sure to other members of council, about the ward districting process itself in terms of representation when you have a citywide vote from some of the community members have raised to me, what does the process entail to look at it where the wards are actually voted upon only by the voters that reside in that ward? That's been raised a couple of times with me. So if you would.
Sure. So as I understand your question, to convert our existing ward system to true electoral districts, basically is what's being asked maybe by certain members of the public.
Yes.
We can do that. There is something called a charter change statute that applies to cities. As I mentioned, all of this is specified in our charter. So these 3 wards that we have that allow everybody to vote for the ward representative, that's all in our charter. And so in order to convert that to a district system, we would have to change the charter. Council could initiate that. You could put a referendum out there to let the public initiate that. I mean, that can be done in a number of different ways. And probably as you saw from that memorandum that I shared with you all about the history and when we went from 13 to 7, and that was a community initiated thing. They were the ones who kind of got the signatures and got the referenda put on the ballot. And so there are ways to do that. I mean, it's certainly not quick. It would need to go through an election. City council could, I need to check. There are certain categories of charter change that the council can just do. I'm not sure that is one. And I have a feeling it would be the kind of thing you would want to hear from the voters on. So obviously it would take time and it would take an election to do that. All right, that was it. I'll bring it back to you on November 21st for a vote.
I'm sorry, I thought you were stopping there and had more presentation. My bad.
That is it, Mayor Pro Tem.
Indeed.
I kept it short and sweet. I mean,
Indeed.
Councilmember Williams often accuses me of being very loquacious, I would say.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll
This
get
time
it.
I was on point, very short.
I'll just say very quickly, and I appreciate all the work. This has been really fascinating, reading all of this. Because we don't have a true ward system, and when I say true ward system, our system is more designed to get zip code diversity on the council, more so than, empower a specific community. And because everybody in the city gets to vote on, it's not like we're going to weight a vote based upon the population in a particular district or Ward 2 because it's got more people, it's going to get more represented. I mean, without that other stuff, our ward system is really just, a math game in terms of zip codes. For that reason, I actually am leaning more towards option 1 because it precisely does kind of even out the numbers in the ward. I mean, a lot of people are moving to Southeast Durham, and growth projection, while it's a science, it's not a perfect science. I mean, another part of the city may get hot at any given time in the future. We don't know for certain. But for purposes of this exercise, because we don't have we don't have a strong mayor, so the council doesn't really act as a legislative body with an executive to kind of go back and forth. We're a deliberative body. We're more like a board of directors. So I'm not as concerned. If we had all that other stuff that comes with a ward system, I'd be more concerned. But straightforward numbers, I think the option that makes the population in each ward as close as possible to each other, for me, is just the most straightforward approach until and unless we become a true ward system with all that other stuff that comes with it. I like option 1. It just seems more equitable to me. But thank you, appreciate it.
Thanks, Mayor Pro Tem.
You are correct. I'm sorry. Not used to having the chair. Awesome, thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's all good. It's like a whole new world up here. Councilmember Caballero, did you have a comment? Councilmember Freeman has a comment.
I'm not in a ward seat, so I kind of feel like this isn't like the space that I really have a strong opinion on. I will say I like the maps in one better, just because it looks neater, like just tidier.
More contiguous.
Exactly.
More compact.
Like, okay, contiguous and compactness, and it's map 1. Yeah. So I'm just sharing that with my colleagues so they know where I stand, but this is quite frankly not a hill I'm going to die on.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any other thoughts or comments? Councilmember Freeman?
Sure, thank you. I think specifically because I'm in Ward 1, I'm kind of interested because I know that the way that it's configured, there's a lot of sensitive areas in Ward 1, which makes it that slower growth. And so I'm concerned, or I want to raise the concern, I don't think it's a big concern, but I'm thinking that the slower growth would continue, and so having a higher in option 2 number might be helpful because the growth in 2 and 3 is likely to continue to be, especially 2, explosive as it has been. And so I don't know how much of the planning, like where their cut for this number was, if it was back in September, but I know we've added a number of, cases that have come forward. You're talking 200 and 300, acres of land that's being mass graded and all of that. So I'm not sure, in my estimation, Equitable would actually be looking at the kind of topography of the community and acknowledging that 1 is probably a little bit more rural than 2 and 3. And I think 3 is a little bit more rural too in certain sections. But there's definitely a difference. And I think 2 is going to continue to grow as fast as it has been. And so giving it a lower number, I think it'll grow pretty quickly in the next 5 years and it would catch up. So that's just adding some context. That's all. Thank you.
Do you all mind if I ask if Kelly Doss is available and she can kind of address how she configured that map? Diana, is Kelly on the call? No. Okay.
Maybe she could email.
We can certainly follow up with some information on how she drew that map and
And just specifically what the date.
her cutoff date
Yeah.
for drawing the map. The website went live on September 6th. She probably was working on these maps, tweaked them late August, but I will confirm with her.
Thank you. Councilmember Hyman?
Yeah, and so I saw there was comments from the community, right? Is that going to be still open until we vote? Okay.
It is. The website is still live. They can still submit comments. Looking over it. Oh, Beverly. They can still submit comments on that website until the date of the vote. Was that what we decided? Yes. The website, the city website. Yes.
Great. Mayor Pro Tem Middleton?
Thank you, Councilmember Johnson. I want to associate myself with everything that Councilmember Freeman has said. The only thing is, though, is that every issue that she's articulated, which I think is accurate, is not going to be fixed by this, because it would behoove you, if you're on this council, to vote and act in a way, because you're elected at large, to address every area of the city as if you live there. I mean, there's no incentive not to, and that's why I said, unless we go to an actual full ward system, every member of this council works for every neighborhood in the city, because they're going to be voting for you. So everything you said, I agree with, but this is artificial. We just changed the population by moving lines, but the dynamics of growth in our city, I mean, even if we bump up the population of Ward 1 by redrawing a line, if there's no growth in that number is going to be eclipsed anyway in a few years by the organic, natural, real world stuff that's happening. So I don't want to say it's theater, but from a real world point of view, because we're all elected at large, all of the problems that you've articulated are all of our problems. It's not just Ward 1 representative, because we're elected by the entire city. And until that changes, it is what it is. So, which is why I think that since we have to do it, we're compelled to do it legally, I think just a straightforward evening it out across population lines, which are going to change in the next 2 years anyway, is really the most straightforward. The things that my colleague, Councilmember Freeman, has pointed out, things we need to be working on anyway and at all times, notwithstanding populations of wards, because we're all elected at large. Anyway, so that's what I would add. Thank you, Councilmember.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. Councilmember Freeman?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. And I do want to make sure I do clarify, because if it was coming from a point of representation, it's really from a point of who can run, because that's who can run from that ward. And I'm just trying to make sure that the most folks have the opportunity to represent, kind of serve in this space, so to speak. It's not really about whether we cover the whole state, the whole city or what have you. I feel like I try to make sure I represent everybody the same, even if I don't cover the city or town or whatever. So I hear you and I agree. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Madam Attorney, I would love to see the population data if, whenever we get the email from your GIS person, if we could also, if she could also include just like maybe the population per, can we get population per precinct? I guess you would have to have that in order to draw.
I believe she has it.
Yeah.
So you want more of the raw data that they received from the Census Department?
Yeah, I would love to see like the population per precinct in 2010 and 2020, just to have a look at it.
And actually, I think that may be in iLegislate. There may be it's like a table. I believe I did submit that.
I will look for that, thank you. And if it's not, if it's not there, I'll let you know.
It's not there?
I'm not sure.
Okay. I will check, and if it's not there, I'll send it either way.
There's a table of where each,
Maybe it's a precinct change.
Each precinct and the ward it was in.
Got it.
In 2004, 2011, option 1 and option 2.
Okay, so what you would like to see is an additional column that has the actual population of
The
the
actual
precinct.
population from 2010 and 2020.
Got it.
Yeah, I was interested that there wasn't as much population growth in downtown as I expected in Ward 1, and that it was more in Ward 2. Just because we've seen so much high-density housing in the downtown area, and I'm just wondering if maybe if downtown is going to grow more quickly over the next 10 years, or if the volume of growth in the other wards is just going to continue to outstrip downtown. So it would be interesting to look at 2010 to 2020 as a reference for those specific precincts.
Okay, I will follow up with Kelly. And
Thank
we'll get
you.
that data to you.
Any other thoughts or questions? Councilmember Freeman?
Thank you. Along those lines, I'm thinking out loud. So I'm thinking that the population data and the precinct data is going to be really off because a lot of folks aren't resident voters here. So I think we've got a lot of folks who are second homeowners in the downtown core, more of that than, yeah. So even if, in addition to the precinct, if there was probably more data around race, gender, that might be more helpful too.
Thank you.
Okay, and I want to make clear I understand. So in this process, we're only counting pure population numbers. We don't count registered voters. So, okay, that's okay. All right.
Councilmember Williams, did you have a comment?
Well, I'm listening to the comments. I'm wondering if the data that's been asked for, requested, is going to show us trajectory, population growth, maybe historically, within specific areas. I'm assuming that may be part of what informed the maps. Okay.
That's what I'm thinking as well. And I'm sorry Kelly couldn't, I think she had some technology issues getting with the link, but my guess is that map 2, the distinction between map 1 and map 2, map 1 being very evenly drawn, map 2 kind of accounting for where planning and others kind of give their best guess at where the growth is going to be. But as Mayor Pro Tem said, I mean, any area of the city can get hot at any time, and that can shift.
Yeah.
So it's an art, not a science, right? So
Yeah, and it's tending to get hot fast.
yes, yeah, the winds can
Okay.
change quickly.
Thank you. Councilmember Freeman, and then Councilmember Caballero.
So it would be good to also understand, I guess, how she's using the precinct data, because I guess based on that comment, if we're not using any of that, how does it help?
We're not using any of the precinct data?
Yeah. I know you gave ward history. The ward history is based on precinct, voting precincts,
Yes.
but it wouldn't necessarily align to who was counted in a census.
Okay, the demographics of the population
Yeah.
by ward and by precinct.
But ward and precinct is different from, I filled out my census takers request in my home, yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of layers there.
Yeah.
Yeah, the precincts have to stay together, I'm assuming, right?
I mean, by law, they don't have to, but remember, go back to those kind of best practices in drawing new districts.
Right.
You try to keep the precinct intact to reduce the level of confusion for voters. I mean, because then you get a bunch of people, right, showing up at the wrong precinct when they vote, and it's.
Yep. Great. And both maps seem to do that from what I could see. All the precincts are kept together in option 1.
I think she did, make a great effort to try to follow that redrawing guideline.
Thank you. Any other comments? As an at-large council member, I'm kind of with Councilmember Caballero. It's not a hill I'm a die on. I'm in Ward 3, though, either way, so I'll be moving, hanging out with Councilmember Williams here.
This is not about this, but just out of general, because I was thinking about the history of like the movement for smaller council or whatever it was called in our packet. And so out of curiosity, could a charter provision be tied to increasing council as population increases? Like, could we put that in front of the voters? Like, for every X amount % of population? I don't ever want to be LA. LA only has 15 council members. They've never expanded it. It's caused some political issues for them. And so now just thinking about that, and you don't feel like you have to answer this question now, but I am just curious as to, is that something that we could also just bake into a formula for every a percentage of population growth, X amount of seats get added, so that we're never in the position where very few people actually have power in a city that's very, very large potentially. Thank you.
We're happy to research that for you, council member.
Sorry to add more. You can also just reach out to School of Government too.
All right, friends, I think we're good. Kim's leaving the podium, so we better be. Thank you. I'll pass the gavel back to our illustrious mayor.
Thank you, Councilwoman Johnson. Great job. We will now yield to Councilwoman Freeman, who will lead us on item 16, which is the update to inform disposition and redevelopment of the property located at 505 West Chapel Street. Turn it over to you, Councilwoman Freeman.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I will turn it over to Gina or is it Stacy? For presentation.
Yes, good afternoon. Gina Probst, General Services Department. We have with us today Elizabeth Packer with HRNA Advisors, been our consultant on this journey, and Stacy Poston, who is our project manager for this project. And we will begin.
So I'm not seeing on the screen.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, members of council. Stacy Poston, as Gina introduced, General Services Department. Happy to be here today to talk about 505 West Chapel Hill Street and the redevelopment project at that location. Back in 2018, City Council declared this property surplus as a part of looking at our real estate portfolio. And for the past several years, we have been working on disposition and redevelopment of this site. And today we want to talk a little bit about some of the information that we've gathered. Control L. We want to talk a little bit about the priorities for on-site development at this site, potential pathways for disposition, and what decisions we need to think about as we are to move forward into a new process for disposition of this site. In specific, we want to present to you updated information. We were last in front of council in late July and early August with responses from 2 different proposals from development teams. Council deemed neither of those proposals sufficient to move forward and to advance into negotiations. And so since that time, we have gathered a significant amount of information that we want to share with you today to inform 3 key decision points for council. First, we want to really talk about what the future development priorities are with the current council and the current state of the market and economy. What are our current development goals as we advance? Next, we want to talk with you about what the redevelopment of the site looks like and the role that the city wants to play in that redevelopment. And last, we want to talk also about the preferred approach to disposition. And what I would say here is that the development priorities that council determines and directs to staff are really going to inform number 2 and number 3, that we really want to start the conversation with the development priorities as we advance through. So where are we now? As I mentioned, we had 2 solicitation processes, neither of which came to fruition for the project. And so we are here today to talk about some of the information, some of the data that we have gathered since we were here in late July and August, and to share that with council. And we've got a significant amount of information in your packets. And I apologize for the volume and density of that. And we're here and available to respond to any questions you have. I realize there's quite a lot of information in that packet. First, we looked at demographic and socioeconomic trends and how downtown Durham has changed since 2018. We all know there's been, just an amazing amount of change since that time. Additionally, we looked at what the real estate market looks like in downtown, in the city, sort of citywide across the city, and in the region itself. And what has happened since we set previous development priorities and what we ought to be thinking about now, and some data related to that. And there's quite a bit of information in the agenda packet. Additionally, we looked and hired MVP to provide a cost estimate of what it would take to rehabilitate the existing building, what it would look like. And then also, if we were to just demolish the structure itself, what the cost would be, what the physical actual cost would be. And so we have that information in your packet. And what I would say about some of those costs is we can get into some of the specifics of them, but they really are related to the building itself, not to further development of the site or full tenant upfit of what a tenant might want to have if they were to get it to a Class A. Really, it's sort of the starter pack to deliver what we call a vanilla shell. Next, we updated an appraisal. We got a new appraisal from Valbridge looking at 2 different things. One is, if we were to just sell the property as it currently stands with no restrictions of any kind, what would the valuation look like today? And then with the current development priorities, the 5 that were previously issued in the previous solicitations, what the market value looks like on that property today. So all of that information is in your packet, and Elizabeth Packer from HRNA is going to come up in a second and walk us through some of those details and what some of that information means for us as we think about moving forward. From a process standpoint, we're here today to present these informational updates and to start the conversation around what development priorities we have. And depending sort of on how far we get today with the conversation and where council feels like we are, we're prepared to come back and to continue to those conversations to help get us to a point where we can get some direction on what those priorities might be. Then we would take the information that we get and the direction from council on that and develop a disposition strategy such that we would potentially come back in March and April with council with an actual sort of recommended approach to disposition using the development priorities and the different approaches to how the city might want to stay in the deal and what those things might look like. So this is a potential process path. We also can go a little slower if council determines that this timeline is not sufficient to give y'all appropriate time to consider, or you have other direction on information that you need to be able to sort of make a more informed decision. So with that, I will introduce Elizabeth Packer from HRNA to walk you through some additional details.
Hello, it's good to be back. So as Stacey mentioned, we're going to talk through some of the updated research that staff has done since the last time that we were here. And so to begin, we're going to recap the 5 development priorities that guided both of the past 2 solicitation processes. So we'll talk through each one of these in turn and take a look at how, given changing market conditions, what some of the trade-offs associated with these development priorities are. So just to recap the priorities that have been in the past 2 processes, these were articulated by council back in 2018 when the first solicitation process took place. So first was providing significant component of on-site housing, so a requirement for 80 units of permanently affordable housing, affordable at 60% AMI. The next priority that developers had to respond to was generating significant revenue to the city, both a one-time purchase price to purchase the site, as well as generating tax revenue from on-site development. The third requirement developers had to respond to was delivering a significant amount of commercial space. So the past RFP articulated a preference for a minimum of 250,000 square feet of commercial uses that supports employment, so office, lab, retail. The fourth priority was preservation of the existing Milton Small Building, ensuring that it would be rehabbed into a viable use. And then lastly, the fifth priority defined by council was to deliver a project that creates a new landmark downtown and really reflects best practices in urban design and promotes an activated street level experience. So to talk through each of these, beginning with the affordable housing requirement, this was identified as the #1 priority in community engagement. So back when this site first became vacant, the city ran a variety of community engagement activities. There was a survey with over 900 responses, pop-up events throughout downtown, and again, on-site affordable housing was identified as the top priority. There is an existing gap of affordable housing downtown. The demand continues to grow. So in rethinking development priorities, council may want to consider increasing the amount of affordable housing that's included on site. The principal trade-off here to keep in mind is that affordable units, given their below market rent, represent a negative on site land value. So there's a direct trade-off between affordable units and financial return. You can also get to the point that depending on the portion of units that are affordable, if you increase the proportion, you could get to a point where you ultimately end up with a negative land value. And that would, in that situation, the city would have to put in subsidy to render the development feasible. The next priority was, again, around the generation of revenue from the sale of the site, as well as from tax revenue by the development delivered. So given the market context today, there's a lot of uncertainty in real estate today, still as the impacts of COVID, continue to change the way developers view risk and make development decisions. So given that, and given in the past process that the two land offers didn't really meet expectations, the city may want to consider, rather than doing a sale, as in the past two processes, consider an option like a ground lease where the city stays in the deal long-term, and as such, you're foregoing an upfront payment for the site, but in exchange, you're staying in long-term and getting regular payments over a long-term period of time. So we'll talk about the ground lease more as we get through the presentation and get into disposition methods, but just wanted to preview that here. And another trade-off or benefit potentially of the ground lease is the city is maintaining ownership of the site. So that gives you stewardship of the property into the future, which could be quite important with the ability to maintain permanent affordability of on-site units because the city continues to be the owner. The third development priority, again, was around that inclusion of commercial uses with a specific threshold of commercial space. I think in particular here, given the very seismic shifts that have happened in the commercial office market, it might be wise to think about reducing the square footage thresholds for office and maybe even removing that minimum together. In 2018, when that development priority was created, the office market was very different than where we are today. This is detailed more in the market analysis section of the agenda memo, but for example, vacancy in downtown Durham was, in the 2 to 5% range. It's more than doubled today. That's just one indicator that the market has not recovered and demand is not where it used to be. So in thinking about what is more viable in today's market, flexible space and a mix of office and lab space is likely more palatable to developers and seen as a less risky investment. Something to note, however, is without demanding or mandating some kind of commercial component, it's likely that a developer would choose to deliver a majority residential project, given that there is a very strong demand for apartments in Durham, and that demand is projected to continue to be robust. The fourth development priority was around the preservation of the Milton Small Building. So that was again, in that community engagement that was done early on in the process, that was identified by the community as there was desire to maintain the building. The building has historical significance to the preservation community, and it's also seen as a unique landmark in downtown Durham. So those are some of the reasons I think that had motivated the desire to preserve the building. Given the state of vacancy and deterioration of the building, it would cost a lot of money to rehabilitate. So one of the new data points here, as Stacy mentioned, we engage with MVP to do a cost estimate. What would it cost to bring this building from its current state to a viable shell condition? So as Stacy mentioned, when we say viable shell condition, it's, you know, updating systems, replacing and gutting and cleaning all of the existing problematic parts of the building, restoring the lobby and elevators, but all of the upper floors would just be kind of open, blank shell. So the cost to do that, to get to viable shell condition, is just over 17 million, so a total of 17.4 million. But in reality, the developer would incur additional costs on top of that to get it ready for a tenant. So clearly that cost has significant impact on financial offers to purchase this site. We saw that in the last process. Both the two development finalists did not attach any value to the building, and the high cost they would incur to rehab the building impacted the purchase prices. And a last point on the building is preserving the building has impacts on overall site design. So with the existing building there, a developer is fitting in the rest of the program around that building. If the building were to be demolished, a developer faces a blank canvas of a 4-acre site that they can develop and arrange as they see fit. The last development priority was around the delivering signature design and creating an activated street level experience. So 505 is one of the last city-owned properties downtown, so it represents one of the city's last opportunities to activate the street-level experience and influence design. So if the city were to just sell off the site to a private developer without putting any restrictions in place, they are losing their ability to kind of dictate what the site looks and feels like. And given high construction costs in today's market, it's likely that a developer would sacrifice design priorities to maintain the financial feasibility of their development. So now that we've talked through those development priorities, want to think through different pathways to disposition and the pros and cons associated with those and what it means for the city's role. So at a high level, there's sort of 3 pathways. An upset bid public sale is one end of the spectrum where the goal is really just to maximize financial return. So you're selling the site to the highest bidder. The past 2 processes that the city ran were variations on an upset bid, so cost was not the determining factor. The city put in conditions, we just talked those through. Those 5 development priorities dictated how the city evaluated developers, but they were offering to sell the site and looking to developers to offer a purchase price. There are other options the city could pursue. So as mentioned earlier, one of those would be a ground lease. So in a ground lease, which we'll talk about in a bit more detail, the city is retaining ownership and entering into a long-term partnership with a private developer. And then at the other end of the spectrum from upset bid would be the city assuming the prime developer role. And we'll talk about this role in turn, but in this case, the city is retaining ownership and assuming pretty much all of the responsibility from pre-development through operations and management. So it requires a lot of capacity and financial investment on the city's part, but in exchange, you're retaining full control over everything that happens. So just to kind of recap and re-emphasize the pros and cons of these different options. So in the upset bid, where a development partner is acquiring full ownership of the site, they're charged with leading the development, construction, and overseeing operations and management. So the pro here is the city is, selling it up front, getting a lump sum payment in exchange, and then the city staff isn't required to be involved. No city capacity is needed to be involved any further once a development agreement has been reached. So some of the cons are, as a result of selling the property off, the city is giving up its opportunity and ability to provide oversight and to determine what's happening on the site. Again, as emphasized, you are selling it at one point in time, so you're giving up the ability to realize profits in the long term, especially, again, given the uncertainty in today's market. As market conditions change, the city wouldn't be enjoying any of those long-term benefits. And as we saw in the last process, in an upset bid sale or in a free sale, a developer's offer is going to be impacted by market conditions. So we saw in the last process how those lower offers were reflective of a lot of the uncertainty and risk that continues to define the commercial real estate market. So for each of these, we wanted to provide kind of a snapshot of an example of how other municipalities have assumed these different roles. So this is an example from Mecklenburg County. So similar to how Durham ran the past two processes, the county oversaw a competitive RFQ and RFP for two sites in the Brooklyn Village neighborhood of Charlotte. So this wasn't a pure upset bid. The county did put some conditions in place. Similar to Durham, there was a requirement for a component of affordable housing. So after running the process, the county negotiated with its chosen development partner, BK Partners. They sold the sites, and the developer is currently finalizing plans with construction required to begin in February of next year. So that's an example of, a public entity using a competitive solicitation process to reach a sales and development agreement. The next role, again, would be the ground lease arrangement. So in this case, the city is retaining ownership of the site, and it's the job of the private developer to do all of the planning, site prep, provision of infrastructure, and then oversee all of the vertical development that's included on site. Ground leases are typically structured in the long term, often a term of 49 or 99 years. At the conclusion of a lease, the property reverts to city ownership again. So the city would then retain ownership of the assets that the private partner had built. So some of the benefits of this structure, the city is transferring all of the risks to the private developer partner and allowing the private developer to bring in their expertise around construction and bring their own development efficiencies to the process. It's also distributing the city's return over the course of decades. So again, the lease term is 49 to 99 years. The city over that term would be receiving an annual payment. So that's likely to eventually outpace whatever upfront price the city would realize from a sale. Of course, the trade-off, as mentioned, is you aren't getting an upfront sales price because you're not selling the site, you're retaining ownership. There would be some requirement of staff time to monitor the lease agreement and ensure the developer is meeting their end of the bargain. And because the city would be negotiating with a private development partner to structure a lease that's beneficial to both, that will require compromise around some of the development priorities. So an example of a ground lease in the area, so Go Triangle recently engaged with a private development partner to ground lease their new bus station facility in downtown Raleigh. So they did a competitive solicitation process and selected a development partner, Hoffman and Associates. So they entered into a 99-year ground lease to deliver a mix of uses that includes both commercial space as well as residential units. Hoffman is required to include a component of affordable units, so similar to how Durham has approached this site. So the lease terms, Hoffman will be paying Go Triangle an annual ground rent payment that is subject to a 2% inflation escalation on an annual basis. And then there are set points over the course of the 99-year lease for reevaluation where there's potential to restructure the terms. And then the last role that we wanted to think through is the city acting as prime developer. So again, this is the city maintains control of the site, designs a master plan to guide the development, obtains all the financing and approvals necessary, and then oversees, eventual implementation of different development pads by different developers who have experience in that particular use. So the pro here is the city has complete control over what happens on the site, from its design to its actual development program. So if the council decides it has a pretty complex mix of development priorities and feels that the best way to achieve those is by retaining control, assuming the prime developer role allows you to do that. The trade-offs here are it's a significant undertaking, so it requires a lot of expertise in structuring complex public-private partnerships. It's a lot of capacity and time to do all of that upfront work to prepare sites to then attract a private developer partner. And perhaps most importantly, the city is taking on all of that upfront financial risk. So they are making all the upfront, taking on all of the upfront costs and expending significant financial resources to prep the sites in order to then be able to attract a private development partner. That also means that it's a much longer time horizon for the city to realize any payback on that initial investment. So often we see municipalities choosing to take on a prime developer role when they have either a pretty large site and as well as sites that they've identified as really in need of reinvestment, and it's up to the public sector to kind of take the first step to then attract attract private investment. So in this example from DC, there's a neighborhood called Hill East where there is a large amount of vacant property on publicly owned land, so a total of 11 acres. It was home to a former large homeless shelter. And so that is now vacant. So in order to start to prep this area for reinvestment and redevelopment, the city took on the role of prime developer, so it's handling all of the site planning and site prep activities to start to sell off individual sites to private development partners. So they've already built 2 parking garages and are in the process of soliciting developers now to take on individual parcels or prepared sites to help realize their larger mixed-use vision for reimagining this neighborhood. So just sort of as a recap, these 3 options occur across a spectrum of risk and reward. So in the upset bid sale, the city is minimizing its risk since it's selling the site and then exiting the deal. At the other end of the spectrum, again, is that prime developer role where the city is assuming all of the risks, but potentially in the long term realizes a greater reward. And then sort of in the middle is the ground lease role where you're retaining ownership but outsourcing all of the development and upfront financial risks to your private partner. And then so when it comes to the mechanism for disposition, depending on the preferred development role of the city, essentially all of them all roles will require a solicitation process of some sort to select a partner with some slight variation. So again, the upset bid sale, similar to the last 2 processes, the city released a competitive RFQ and RFP to then select a chosen developer partner to enter into negotiations. With a ground lease, the city would follow a similar process with doing an RFQ and an RFP. Do want to note that would require intentional marketing to find development firms that have interest and capacity in doing these kinds of complex projects, as well as negotiations at the end around structuring a lease that is amenable to both the city and to its chosen private partner. And then lastly, for the prime developer role, as we've talked through, the city is doing a lot of upfront prep work, so creating a development strategy, a master plan for the site, doing all of the prep work to entitle sites and including providing horizontal infrastructure, and then running RFQ, RFP processes to select developers for those individual pads once they are ready. So I know that was a lot of information to get through, but that brings us towards the conclusion of our presentation here, and just want to kind of reframe how Stacy presented the goals at the start of this presentation. Want to focus on the next steps for council and what, where staff is looking for direction. So I think first and most importantly, as Stacy mentioned, is getting clarity on what council wants to see on site. So once we have a sense of what the development priorities are, that then influences what is the best approach and mechanism for achieving those goals. So in terms of clarifying on-site development priorities, council may decide to modify some of the 5 prior development priorities. There may be a decision to eliminate certain ones or introduce completely new development priorities. So I think that's where we definitely want to have guidance and thought there, and hopefully all of the information in the agenda memo in terms of how the market has changed can help inform how council is thinking about those development priorities. So that would include, any requirements around land use and or program that council wants to see on site. So, affordable housing, any open space minimums, if there will be minimums around commercial space included on site, a position on the existing building and whether or not that should be preserved in rehabs, any other kind of restrictions or requirements that the city wants to ensure are delivered on site. Once that has been done and there's a consensus around what those guiding development priorities are, then city staff, as Stacy said, will be able to craft a recommended disposition strategy, including the best approach to achieve those priorities. So it might be that in recognition of what's happened in the past 2 solicitation processes and in recognition of wanting to be able to deliver all of the city's priorities, perhaps another public sale is not the best approach, and rather a ground lease could be the best way to achieve the city's goals. And then again, once the role is determined, that'll inform what the appropriate mechanism for disposition is and how to structure an RFQ and RFP process to really ensure the city is positioned to achieve its goals. So that is the end of our formal presentation. So happy now to open it to discussion and take questions.
Thank
I think
you.
we have some speakers.
I'm acknowledging there are some public comments, and I believe there's some online as well. And thank you. And I would like to start with the folks in the room, and then we can move to online to give them, and I think we can give them 3 minutes to speak. Okay. So we'll start with Ms. Alice Sharp. And then Bob Ashley. And Tom Miller. And then Patricia Harris.
3 minutes start? Okay. It's been a while since I've done this, but I'm so happy to be here in front of this wonderful council. Today I want to bring you some words from Rob Emerson, who's a land planner here in Durham. And I think he's already sent you an email to most of the council members. But it starts, Dear Council, the Home Security Life building at West Chapel Hill and Duke Street should be preserved because adapting old buildings is what Durham does best. We don't have a beautiful coastline or a downtown river walk, but we have places like American Tobacco, West Village, Golden Belt, the Durham, and Unscripted hotels. All character-defining places in Durham that were once slated for the wrecking ball. These creative and funky places, I've always wanted to say that word in City Hall, connect us to our past and give Durham the unique character that has led to a stunning renaissance of a city once reeling from the demise of the tobacco and textile industries from which it arose. I hear constantly from those who have been here a while that they regret the steady erosion of Durham's historic character and the replacement of smaller and funkier places with forests of bland apartment buildings clad in fake stucco. This 4-acre publicly owned site is large enough for everything that the city of Durham wants: affordable housing, a great public space, everything on the city's wish list. But preserving the home security life building can and should be part of a profitable redevelopment of this important gateway site. I have worked in development and historic preservation in Durham for 25 years on dozens of adaptive reuse projects, once vacant and derelict buildings now populated by restaurants, craft breweries, apartments, distilleries, shops, art galleries, offices. All of this seemed unimaginable 25 years ago, unimaginable. Biotech companies have now found Durham. All of these are infused with Durham, and the biotech industries have infused that energy and capital in Durham. The Home Security Life Building offers perhaps the last great opportunity for the city of Durham to do what we do best: preserve, modernize, and give new life to an interesting place that could only exist in Durham, North Carolina. I also had the fortunate opportunity to have a Durham architect, Phil Freeline, who I had the honor of working with early in my career. Phil took the time in the depths of his illness in 2018 to provide me with the following quote, and this is it. "The Home Security Life Insurance Building is a noteworthy example of mid-century modern architecture, offering a counterpoint to its brutalist neighbor," and that's an architectural term, "of the same vintage, North Carolina Mutual Life, also a fine building. Home security represents a more constrained, Miesian aesthetic with well-proportioned volumes and a strong street presence. I encourage the city to embrace this handsome structure as an important element of this site's redevelopment plans."
Thank you.
As opposed to demolishing it. Phil Freeline, 2018.
Thank you, Ms. Sharp. And Bob Ashley.
Yeah. Thank you, Councilmember Freeman. Madam Mayor, members of the council, thanks very much for this opportunity to talk today. I want to take just a couple of minutes here of your time to talk about one of the challenges that I think we all see, certainly we understand as preservationists with this building, and that is the heavy burden of its past, especially its most recent past. Not its whole past. It had 25 years of past before the last 20 years as a police station. But I understand the concerns and problems that that causes. I get the history of that building for those 20 years, the malignancy that went on there in the eyes of many in our community, the pain that it caused for many in our community is very real. I get that, I understand that, absolutely. But I want to step back for a second and say that there's more to its history than that. And besides, the building is more than any one tenant or set of tenants during its past. And there's a special advantage, I think, in the context of that concern in preserving that building. And that is, buildings tell stories. I believe that as a preservationist. I believe that, as many of you know, I'm also involved with the Museum of Durham History. I believe that buildings can help us understand the narrative that got us to where we are. Painful sometimes, celebratory sometimes, but it's there. And if that building remains, I would certainly argue for and advocate a portion of it, a place set aside to tell that story, warts and all, particularly warts in this particular case, so that generations to come will remember that and learn from that. It's an old cliche. Those who don't remember the past are condemned to repeat it. And a building and a structure and a narrative and a story that reminds us of that past is terribly important. So with that in mind, I do hope that while acknowledging and understanding the burden that that building bears, that we can turn that to an advantage to developing, creating, and nurturing the community that we all want Durham to be. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Miller?
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and members of the council. My name is Tom Miller, and I'm the president of the Historic Preservation Society of Durham, Preservation Durham. And I appreciate the time that you're giving us today to talk about the Milton Small Building today. And of course, the thrust of our remarks is we want you to retain as a criterion for the moving forward with this property, the preservation of the building. It had been my hope that Pat Harris would join us today. Pat Harris serves on our board. She has the distinction of being the first African-American woman architect in the state of North Carolina. No one knows this building better than she does. She was with Phil Freelon, together, the two of them, the Freelon Group, when the changing of this building from the insurance office building that it was to the police department that it became. They made up the Freelon Group, and this was their first major project in Durham. And then Pat stayed on with the building for years as the city needed changes, so no one knows it better. She is a strong advocate for the building, and I hope in time you'll have an opportunity to talk with Pat about its potential for preservation. I think you've also received an email from Kathleen Turner with Preservation North Carolina. Kathleen talks about the historic preservation tax credit aspect that's available with this building that has not been discussed in your consultant's report. This is a significant thing. Historic preservation tax credits at the state and federal level have essentially allowed Durham to transform itself. You would not have American Tobacco. You would not have West Village. You would not have the Chesterfield building. You would not have Golden Belt without the sizable tax credits, the redirecting of tax money away from Durham back to Durham with these projects. We're talking about 30% of development costs could come back to us. And that changes the dynamic financially considerably. The building is one of three, and it's the western gateway to downtown. These buildings are all very important. The buildings I'm talking about, of course, are this building, the Milton Small Building, one of the finest mid-century modern buildings left in North Carolina. The Mutual Building across the street, and across the street in the other direction, of course, is the Duke Memorial Methodist Church. These three buildings are defining buildings, monuments to Durham, that we should retain. If we lose any of them, then the context for the whole corner is disrupted. And I like to point out that this building, the Milton Small Building, was built in the 1950s, and then not long after that comes the Mutual Building. This building was built as an insurance company, prominent Durham families involved in the creation of the Home Security Life Company, and then right after it comes the Mutual Building, building a much bigger building, much taller. If this building goes away, the accomplishment and the achievement represented in the construction of the Mutual Building goes away, building a bigger, taller building as a monument to the largest African-American owned corporation in the world.
Thank you.
So those are my remarks. We hope to address you again in other occasions, but we want to stress that this is an important thing to save this building. Once we knock these important architectural monuments down, the culture of the city has changed and we can't replace them. Thank you very much.
And Ms. Patricia Harris? Is she online? Okay. Thank you. And online, I have Mr. Mick Rayner and Rick Larson.
Yes, Madam Mayor, can you hear me?
I can hear you. This is Councilmember Freeman.
Thank you. Sorry. Yes, Council, I'm speaking on behalf of Duke Memorial United Methodist Church. which is located directly across the street from 505 West Chapel Hill Street. In large, we concur with the staff's recommendations earlier. They reflect our continued strong conviction that the city has a moral duty to meet the needs for affordable housing for existing residents of downtown. We note the outside consultants report that there are 1,023 households earning below 60% AMI and just 311 affordable units across downtown. This means 800 families are at risk of being displaced from their homes. To address the critical need for affordable housing downtown, here is how we suggest the city would tweak the 5 priorities suggested by city staff today. Number 1, maintaining more affordable housing as part of the RFP, ideally up to as many as 120 units for 60% AMI residents in perpetuity. Why? Because the need is critical, as noted by the consultant and city staff. Number 2, we recommend the ground lease option rather than an outright fee simple sale. Include clauses that will increase the lease amount to reflect rebounds in the value of the land. Why? By removing the need for developers to devote $9 million to purchase the property at its appraised value, this will reduce the developer upfront cost and thereby provide more leeway to increase the units of affordable housing. Number 3, we agree with that staff recommendation. For number 4, we remove the requirement to renovate the Milton Small Building. If proposals seek to renovate the Milton Small Building, we recommend that they would include at least 80 units of affordable housing. Why? Because of the sheer cost of renovating the building. The estimate starting at $17.4 million is likely to scare off proposals by developers who are committed to absorbing the financial impact of including substantial affordable housing. Frankly, we believe affordable housing needs are more vital to the culture of Durham than the historical preservation objectives. Number 5, the approved design must include adequate setback from West Main Street to maintain the pedestrian and open character of Chapel Hill Street, where it does front Duke Memorial and Duke Street and Gregson Street. Duke Memorial is on the National Register of Historic Places, and Chapel Hill Street is a major pedestrian and vehicle artery linking a number of important neighborhoods within downtown and the transit station. West End, Duke University, different houses of worship, and the West Main Commercial District, among others. The 505 development should welcome the foot and vehicle traffic to downtown and not appear to be an imposing obstacle to navigate around as people go into downtown. We thank you, Council, for your consideration and the opportunity to offer these comments.
Thank you. And Mr. Rick Larson.
Councilmember, Mr. Larson is not in the queue, but he did send his comments via email.
Thank you. And I do believe we have one more public comment in the audience. Former Mayor Whip Gully. Welcome.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, Mayor Pro Tem and Councilmember Freeman, thank you all. I didn't necessarily come down intending to make comments. I'm grateful, though, for your all's time and for your indulgence, as always, of members of the public. And boy, with this piece of property, for your stamina and your endurance to stay after this and make it something that I think all of us in Durham are going to be really proud of in years to come. I'm grateful for the staff report. I think it's a difficult thing to deal with at this point in time with the different market forces. Grateful as well for the ongoing concern and priority you've given to affordable housing as a part of what will happen at that site. So I would offer a couple of additional thoughts just as you all begin to think about this and talk among yourselves about what makes sense. I think the staff report well noted that when it comes to commercial development, to office development in particular, that it's a very difficult time to say what's going to happen. I mean, how many people are going to want to go back to the office going forward? Nobody knows. And it's clear that it'll be fewer, but the market for office is unsettled and uncertain, and probably will be that way for some time to come. So the effort to move forward with this property as mixed use, including a significant office component, is, I think, therefore more problematic. And certainly bodes well for if the council wanted to say, we want to move forward with some things, but we're going to hold off on that to take that path. It's interesting, the housing part of the development is almost the opposite. You all know all too well that in Durham, we have a significant need for housing, both in general for additional housing units that'll ease the demand that's out there, that'll help ease the pressure on rents going up that too many of the folks that you all know and care about are facing. But that demand is overwhelmed by the need for affordable housing. So there's a significant need for additional housing units and a critical need for affordable housing units. And if you said we're going to go slow or wait to move forward with this property because of the commercial office, the problem you hit is that delay for housing means only two things. The cost will go up for the housing, and the ability to provide a number of affordable units will shrink. You won't be able to do as much as we could. So it's sort of a whipsaw of how to move forward with one and yet perhaps wiser to go slow with the other. How do you deal with that? Well, you can divide the property. That has some advantages, but it has some disadvantages, and y'all, I'm sure, will talk about that. I want to suggest one other possibility that's there. It's what you would expect from a housing advocate. But you could begin to say, in Durham, when it comes to office space, particularly prime office space, significant office space for major corporations or whatever, we've never failed to be able to step up on that within the private sector. And so perhaps you could see this as a new downtown housing neighborhood.
Thank you,
not
Mr.
only
Governor.
add a lot of units, but add a lot of affordable units. Thank you so much, Councilmember.
Thank you. City Manager Page.
Thank you, Councilwoman Freeman. I did want to take a small moment to thank the staff for bringing this presentation today. We've worked on it in the background to bring you a lot of, as they mentioned, dense information. We knew that this would be a multiple session item, and I just wanted to bring to your attention that we are not expecting your decisions today. We want you to have an opportunity to review all of this material in detail. We do plan at this time to bring an item back to you in December, and that will be an additional time for you all to work together on setting development priorities so that we can continue to move the project forward. But I did want to make sure before you decided to discuss these matters today at this work session that we will be back in December with another session. So thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Any of my other colleagues have questions for staff or Madam Councilwoman Johnson? Oh, Councilmember Williams.
This may have been mentioned in the presentation, but it was a lot of information, so I'll ask for staff. Is there any information that tells us market trajectory, like what I know we have to make final decisions, but based on the current market, with so many things changing over the last few years, what I guess, for example, like initially it was like office space, now it's changed in downtown regarding the status of real estate.
Yeah, so the way
Market analysis, I guess I'm looking for.
Right. So the way we tried to structure the market analysis was really focusing on comparing market conditions in 2018 when the development priorities were set to where they are today. So we can start to see, especially with the office example, the office market is not where it was. So the demand is down. We see that by the increase in vacancy, by the decrease in absorption, so less space is getting leased. But unfortunately, we don't have a crystal ball, so no one saw COVID coming. We couldn't have imagined what that would do to the real estate market. We don't know when the market will stabilize and what the long-term impact will be. I think what we can see, in looking at the pipeline of what developers are planning for Durham, the vast majority is residential projects. So included in the agenda packet is a map of all of the known pipeline projects. And there's only two, I believe it's only 2 office projects, and one is the expansion of American Tobacco, which is already established as a node of commercial space that offers pretty unique office to tenants. So all that to say, I think that the market data is pretty telling in terms of what demand is for office, and we saw additionally in the 2022 proposals, we could see the difference in the financial viability of office. So part of that is both driven by the changes in demand as well as changes in construction costs. So construction costs have more than doubled in the past 4 years for office. Rents have not kept pace with that growth. So it just becomes harder and harder for a developer to take on the risk of constructing office with those economic conditions. So I hope that starts to answer your question.
Thank you. And where's your crystal ball?
I would love to have one, but.
Regarding October's performance for inflation, inflation is starting to cool. The first quarter of next year is appearing to look a lot better. Are we factoring in any of that consideration regarding just the development industry and how costs would play a factor with this?
So I think to try to answer your question, the rising in construction costs is not going to magically go down. The drastic increases that we've been seeing in the past 2 years, which have partly been driven by changes in supply chains and complications from COVID, I think that'll probably stabilize, but they're not going to suddenly go down to pre-COVID levels. So development costs will continue to be very high. In terms of inflation and how that impacts the project, I think one thing that to keep in mind, which we tried to highlight in talking about the different developer roles, is staying in the deal long term is one way to ride out those changing macro conditions. And so a ground lease where you're getting payment over decades, and when payments are automatically escalated for inflation as part of a lease structure, that's one way to kind of stabilize the city's return and ensure that the city has a chance to share in long-term growth and to ride out any existing market conditions that are throwing things off, like high inflation.
Okay. One last question. And I know this is a bit technical, but we saw pros and cons in regards to the approach to disposition. Do we have any type of economic cost analysis regarding if we decide to go with housing, if we decide to go with office, if we decided to go with some commercial or other options? Is there a way to grab data around that?
So we have a sense of how developers think about the land value associated with different uses. So for example, as we talked about, affordable housing has a negative impact on land value. So if the city were to say, we want this site to be 100% affordable units, the city would have to put subsidy into the deal to render that feasible. We know that the rehabilitation of the existing building, from looking at the past 2 offers, that had negligible to negative impacts on overall financial offers. So I think in that way, as you weigh the development priorities, you can see what renders the site more, what gives the site more value from a developer's perspective. So for example, we know that multifamily demand continues to be very strong in Durham. Rents are going up. There's a robust pipeline of apartments under construction. So that would be likely the highest land value would be market rate housing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other colleagues? Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, council member. And thanks, staff, for just your perseverance and stamina and helping us, help shepherding us through this process. I want to, just a quick comment and then a question for staff. I appreciate the city manager's reminder that we have time to get into the nuts and bolts. So I will not, and I've got a lot of nuts and bolts questions, so I won't do that today, but I will just make a general comment that this may very well be, aside from passing budgets, one of the most consequential decisions we make as a council. And as I enter into this period of deliberation, for me, I just want to say that this will not be an economically driven decision for me. This will be a value and generational decision, and then the economics will come behind that. This is a 100-year decision. My contribution to the priorities was that this should be a signature corner. It should be a calling card for Durham. I mean, right now, the most prominent feature of our skyline, and I do not mean this disrespectfully in any way, I'm serious, is one city center. Now, we might get lucky and get a Chrysler type or Empire State or Willis type building, and I don't mean height. I mean in terms of character and signature. We might get lucky in the market, but this really, as a government, is our last great opportunity to brand our city in the downtown corridor, to give our calling card to the world, whatever other values are reflected in whatever else we do. So that's going to be informing my approach to decision making about this corner. What price do you place on the value? What price do you place on, as a wealthy city? Sometimes wealthy cities spend their money to do what they value, not because it's necessarily profitable at that moment. I'm not so much constrained or concerned about a timetable, and I say that because it's not as if this is the only game in town with respect to affordable housing. We've got a lot of affordable housing projects going on in Durham, so I want to get this right rather than quick. So to my colleagues, I would just say that this is a huge generational. It's going to outlive, us for a long time, as all of our planning decisions do and land use decisions do. But this one in particular, I think, is our last great opportunity to, as a government, to brand, as the people's voice, to brand our city. My question, with that said, my question is, the memo, Madam Manager, has a motion to contract with HRNA. So I guess my first question is that something we plan on taking action on at our next council meeting? What is our current relationship? Are we on the contract right now? And when does the clock start ticking with this new process?
So I will begin, and staff can come along if needed. HRA has been our partner pretty much during the whole time of the consideration of the disposition of this piece of property. What we have done is extended the scope of their service on a as needed basis, and so they have served as a companion to our staff, bringing the expertise that they bring that we don't hire inside because it would not be efficient for us to do that. We get billed at an hourly rate, and we just ensure that there's a contractual arrangement that the council has to approve, but it allows us to get the service that we need as the process continues. So it's not a rate that is we're paying them just to be our partner, but paying them as they're providing services to us.
Absolutely, and that makes sense, and they've done a great job throughout this entire process. I guess I'm just curious from a process point of view, the $175,000 ask contract, are we being asked to approve that at our next council meeting? And I guess what's the TikTok on that?
Yes, it is. We did have funding remaining on the previous contract that you approved, and we actually used that funding to deliver the products that you see here today along with them. So, and staff shaking their head, we are running out of funding on the current contract that we have, and in order to continue to have continuity and continue to service, this item is an action item along with the presentation item that you're seeing today. So the action item would continue to Monday night.
Thank you, Madam Manager. Thank you, Councilmember Freeman.
Thank you. Any other colleagues with questions? Councilmember Johnson?
Thank you. I don't have any questions. I just wanted to communicate my priorities for the record. So my biggest priority is getting some affordable housing on this site. We continue to have an affordable housing crisis. We will never be able to build enough. There will always be a greater need than what we can handle. And so I think continuing to focus on making sure affordable housing happens on this site is important. My lowest priority is the preservation of the building, particularly if that creates potential issues for the ability to put affordable housing on the site. I think $17 million is just an incredible amount of money to have to justify spending on a preservation project when we just have so many other critical and urgent needs in our community. And while I realize that it would be a significant lift for the city, I really like the idea of us acting as the prime developer. I think it gives us the flexibility and the control that we are really looking for when we put together this really intense RFP and ask developers to meet a lot of different and potentially conflicting goals. I think it would be a really incredible opportunity for us to get exactly what we want on this site if we were to act as the developer and enter into these specific agreements with specific developers about the kind of development that we want to see. It seems like a lot of work. It seems like a really long process on top of an existing really long process. But in a perfect world, that is what I would choose for us to do. And I think that that would result in the best potential outcome for the city and the most likely opportunity for us to actually meet all of our goals. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Jose Hyman.
I want to say thank you to the staff because you really broke this down in kind of layman terms for me to be able to understand it, very organized. But I also wanted to kind of highlight my priority. While again, I agree with my colleague that we're never going to have enough affordable housing, but I get a lot of emails when I'm in the community, people talking about the fact that they would like to stay in Durham, but everybody's moving out. So not everybody, but some people are moving out of Durham because they can't afford it. And the new hot spot is Mebane. I don't know what's going on in Mebane, but I need to go out there and see what's going on. But everybody's moving here, right? And then we've got people who work for the city that stop me and say that they can't afford to live in Durham. They're driving 20 and 30 miles, right? So I would like to see the affordable housing, but I would like to see housing also for people, for our city employees, to be able to also, take advantage of some of this housing. And I'd like to see some commercial. So just kind of, throwing out some of my priorities. But also, too, I was not on the council when you came up with priorities. So can someone talk to me about the next step of how do we do that as a council?
Madam Page.
So as the schedule has been presented today, we do not always know exactly how far we're going to get in a discussion when an item comes up, but it was always our goal to introduce today this information, get you answers to some of your immediate questions that you have, listen to conversation that you have with residents. But we were already planning to bring an item back in December, and it would be for priority discussion and priority setting, because that would be the next big piece of the puzzle in terms of where do we go and how do we proceed from that. We did not, we do not expect the priorities to be identical. Too much time has passed and too much change has occurred. And so you all will set those priorities with us, and it will give us what we need in order to proceed with the redevelopment of the project. And we plan to start that in December. We will be coming back in December to have that discussion.
So thank you. So I just want to say that, this is our opportunity as a council to do something, as I think Mayor Pro Tem said, that we leave a signature mark on. And so I just want to keep that at the forefront because this is really our project, right? And I want to keep that on the forefront. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Caballero.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I had a couple of questions for staff based on an email that we received that I did forward on. Just really quickly, what happens that this building has been nominated for National Register of Historic Places, and so I don't know that process, but if it wins, what are then the limitations for us?
So Stacy Poston, so thank you for that question. I'm going to need to talk to the planning department and to research a little bit. I did see that email come in while I was sitting in council chambers, so I'd like a little time to try to investigate and come back with that information.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I was going to ask just a few things that was my last, thank you, Stacy, sorry. That was one question I had, and then just, I really appreciated the speakers today. You know, I've been pretty transparent with my own journey around this building, which I honestly didn't care at the beginning whether we preserved it or not. I think everyone is in agreement that our #1 priority is affordable housing, and I've been very transparent with the folks who want to preserve the building. If it comes down to affordable housing versus preserving the building, I know where my vote is, and I think that that's probably where most of my colleagues are. I don't actually think we're going to get pitted against one another in that way. I think that we can figure out how to. It's a big site. It's 4 acres. I personally think I'm very interested in the idea of the city becoming the prime developer. I understand, I'm sure that gives staff massive panic attacks, but I'm just going to name it because to me, it creates an opportunity of, quite frankly, just an opportunity I hadn't really honestly thought about. But the preservation of this building, I think, and I'm going to get a little bit bougie and weird about architecture here, and somebody said it, the interplay of that corner between the church and the brutalist building, which is the Mutual Tower, and this building is iconic if done in a right way. You already have your signature corner in downtown. Anyone who really gets into the weeds with architecture will tell you you have potentially a masterpiece right there, if done well, if that building is actually restored to what it's supposed to look like. If you know anything about Mies van der Rohe, that's essentially what you're trying to do. You're trying to bring the outside and reflect the outside back into that building. And we missed that because it's been tampered with a lot. One of my favorite cities in the United States is Detroit. A lot of folks don't like Detroit, but I love Detroit because they didn't rip down their buildings. They kept adding and changing, and you can see the story of a city through its buildings and the story of how folks interact. So that is why I am really keen to preserve it. I understand $17 million is one of the other questions I have around, historic preservation, tax credits, and things like that. So that is all I have to say today. Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Good afternoon again, everybody. I appreciate all that staff has done. You all have put in lots and lots of man hours. I'm sure over the last 3 or 4 years, even before this report, and it's always top-notch. I enjoyed reading it all. I do think the priorities for me have changed a bit. Of course, I think we all agree that affordable housing is probably the #1 priority for, I think, most of us. But I think all of us also agree that we want this to be an iconic kind of gateway project. Now, as to preserving the building, I'm a little torn on that, and I'll tell you, this comes from having grown up right around the corner from it. Literally, I walked past that building before it was the police department, when it was the police department, and since. Pretty much all my life, that's how we would take the route downtown Durham. I don't remember it being a diverse building before it was the police department. I believe that it became diverse. That means people of color actually used that building when it became a police department, right? So we were past that building, and we spent quite a bit of time at the Mutual. And also remembering the Chesterfield building was where my father worked. So I remember when he would get off of work, and all of the men would come out of the Liggett and Myers, and it was diverse. That's not what it is now. So a lot of these buildings that have been renovated in this Renaissance, they're not diverse now. And that's one real issue that I have with downtown Durham, because downtown Durham was very diverse when I was a child. And that's not the case anymore. There is some diversity, but for old Durham, for those of us who've been here, that's not the Durham that we remember now. So as we talk about these renovations and we're glad to see it renovated, but still there are significant populations that are not included. And that's what I'm concerned about. 17.4 million, and we renovated. And we know that people are downtown Durham in Willow Street who really don't have any place to buy that's affordable. So I worry about that. I also think about what we lost over in Hayti that has never been renovated or replaced. It's still stark on Fayetteville Street. So one person's idea of renovation and renaissance type things don't necessarily create diversity. And so that's where my struggle is. Downtown Durham right now is more segregated than I've ever seen it in my life. And downtowns should be for everybody to live, work, and play. That's what it was when I was a child, and I know we can't go back, but if renovating means that we're gonna do more of that, what we're seeing now, no, that's why I was elected, to speak for those invisibles, the invisible people who live in downtown Durham and who can't afford much of anything.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And Councilmember Williams.
Thank you. So affordable housing is a priority of mine as well. It's not my number one priority in this space, and I'll tell you why. For me, I don't want to, and I'm not saying any of you all are doing this, but I don't want to put affordable housing there and say, okay, we did it. I wanted to be very intentional. If you look downtown Miami, many of those tall, beautiful buildings, 40% of them are affordable housing. They've built a beautiful place there. Now, I know it's a different tax base, but I'm really interested in looking at how we can do that. As I've continuously said, I don't want to build another all-affordable project, but I do want to incorporate affordability in everything that we do. But I'm not going to ignore the fact that whenever we do affordable housing, that we are going to have to pay for it. And I'm one of those folks, I don't care. You can tax me as long as the taxes are going to the right thing. And I know there are a lot of folks that are here in the city the same way. So I hear the comments that Mayor Pro Tem said it's not an economic one, it's a values one. I think it's going to be both and in this case. Because if we put a few units there and say, okay, we did a little bit here and then we just leave it, well, what does that do? You know, are we being intentional? So for me, I want to be able to place some affordable units there, but I also want to be able to generate enough to build even more. And I think that needs to be our culture moving forward. So I'm not in a silo, I'm not in an isolated mindset on what we put there. I just want it to be as comprehensive as possible. And where I at in the economic side of it is, I want to generate opportunity that's going to generate revenue to create more of what we need. So I don't look at this as we build it and it's like, voila, we're done. I look at this as a leveraging tool of us being able to do even more in other places as well. So I am looking at the ground lease option, and I look forward to talking to my colleagues about that. I just don't want to submit ownership of our land. It's the last major space. I'd rather us, play the long game on it. So I look forward to talking to each of you about what our priorities are going to be.
Thank you. And I guess as presiding chair in this moment, it's a benefit to hear all of my colleagues' comments and to kind of pull it all together and say that I think I'm offering a challenge to staff and trying to figure out a hybrid around an upset bid and a ground lease to give us a maximum opportunity to actually preserve that Milton Small building. I think that the tax credits would offset quite a bit, and acknowledging that we do need developments like specialty. So being able to partner in that way might be beneficial I would also say that I'm of the mind that this is actually one of the major opportunities we have to not just be an iconic corner, but to actually find a way to connect both the West End and Hayti together. And so acknowledging that Heritage Square is actually going into action, and I hope that everyone in the community continues to pour in their opinions, thoughts, history, information about what it should look like and how it should be set up, knowing that we don't own the property. I think that same thing can be done at this site at 505 West Chapel Hill Street. And so I am looking forward to figuring out what that looks like with staff and my colleagues. And I would also add that my priority is really around mixed use and figuring out how this corner intentionally brings commercial space for historically underserved and unserved populations of folks who have businesses. I think that this is it'd be a miss. We've done the housing piece to not actually think about the jobs and how income is produced to create affordability, because we can't just focus on the housing. Focusing on the housing is what they did in New York. I think there were plenty of projects that were affordable, and they're now condos that people cannot afford to live in. So we want to make sure that people can continue to afford that, and I think that means being intentional around a very commercial project in the same way we have been around affordable housing. And so I would love to hear some thoughts around that as well. And so I look forward to this coming back. I understand this is not what we're here to talk about. We're trying to make sure, I appreciate Mayor Pro Tem on clarifying that for us with Manager Page. We're here to discuss or really bring forward the fact that we need to extend the contract with HRA. And so I look forward to seeing that on the docket for our next council meeting. Thank you. And then
Thank you,
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, council member. Just very quickly, I want to just chime in. I want to associate myself with everything everyone said, and I can tell this is going to be one of these moments we're going to be very proud to have this deliberative body and the perspectives up here. I did want to say, just to be clear, I didn't say this wasn't an economic decision. I said this is not primarily an economic decision. This is primarily a values and generational decision which will be informed by our economics. There's a really strange line in the preamble of our Constitution that a lot of people read by really quickly, that it's only present for government and not for businesses, for profit businesses. It says, promote the general welfare. You're not going to find that in a business mission statement because, and that's not a bad thing, they're profit driven for shareholders. We're really the only institution that is called upon to make decisions sometimes that may not appear profitable at first, because they're in the interest of every single person. We're the only group that has that charge. So yeah, absolutely it's going to be an economic decision, but primarily 100 years from now, when our children's children are walking past that corner and they look at it, when they reflect on the decision we made, the first thing they're going to talk about is not going to be whether it was economically sound. It's going to be how beautiful, how inspiring, how much does it help folk. And oftentimes the realization of the value of the investment when it's a generational decision may not be recognized by the generation that made the decision. Sometimes it's accrued and it's deferred to our children and our children's children. So everybody up here has just really inspired me and really fired me up about engaging in this process. But I just want to be clear that I understand very much, and I'm a fiduciary of the city, that all of it comes down ultimately to money. But every once in a while, there are those moments where we get to make a decision that is cast far. It's not primarily balance sheet, it's generational. I believe this is one of those moments before us, and we're fortunate to be in government at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I'd like to just add to that and saying that I feel like I might be the oddity of the person that sits here and pictures all of my decisions in that same way. And it's often referred to as the Janus effect. And so just always looking back to cast a vision forward I really appreciate you highlighting that point. And I think that we all are looking at this in a way that we'll use a lens to cast forward that Janus effect. And so I thank you for that. And I'll turn this back over to Madam Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilwoman Friedman. And thank you to our staff and all our speakers today. Stay tuned. Good decisions, hard decisions, but good decisions coming forward. We have one last presentation that is going to be led by Councilwoman Javier Caballero. Want to check in to see if we need to have a break before that, or we are ready to roll right in. Looks like we're ready to roll right in. I will yield to you, Councilwoman.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Caballero.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Don. I see you're ready to go. Thank you for being here with us.
Trying to get there. Okay, I think we're ready. Good afternoon, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, and council members. It's great to be with you. Here to sort of give you the legal framework under North Carolina and some federal law related to affordable housing. I think this might be the first, some of the information that I'm presenting, I know I have presented to council members individually. I think this is the first time I've put it all together in one, that Kim and I have put it together all in one presentation. And so hopefully council will find it helpful. Hopefully it'll prompt some discussions. The other thing is I don't want to be a downer this afternoon. So I thought, well, the whole beginning part of the presentation is restrictions, what you can't do. So I try to really think, and this actually came out of the group discussion you all had out at Water Management. I started to think, well, there's a lot of things you can't do. I need to put together a list of things you can do. And so the last slide actually covers that point. So this, I know, will be somewhat familiar to all of you, the legal framework. Different states in the United States are considered either Dillon's rule states or home rule states. Sadly, we are not a home rule state. We are not California, where cities in California are free to be innovative, come up with innovative legislation to serve their population. The other category are Dillon's rule states, and those are states that only have the power that a legislature gives to those local jurisdictions. Our courts have never really answered this question, but it's pretty clear we fall into the Dillon's rule category. And what our courts have said is they are going to look at the statutes related to municipal authority, and they are going to strictly construe the language of those statutes. So they're going to look at it and say, hey, city, you don't have any more authority than the words in our statutes say you have. The one other thing is, and I know you're all aware, there was an election on Tuesday. I don't think that was helpful for local governments in the way the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court changed. I think with the composition going forward, statutory authority is going to be even more tightly scrutinized. So that's just a caution, and I'm pretty sure that you all were aware of that Wednesday morning after Election Day. So what are the sources of statutory authority related to affordable housing? The first is the general grant of authority to do zoning, and that's NC Gen Stat 160D-702. We'll go over that. The next statute that I think provides a lot of caution is North Carolina's rent control statute, and that's in NC Gen Stat 4214.1, and we'll review that. And then Durham is actually fortunate because we have a charter provision, and I think you all know charter authority, and Kim addressed charter authority earlier. That's where the legislature says, hey, you city, specifically City of Durham, we are going to let you do the following thing. So it doesn't apply to everyone in the state. So Durham actually has charter authority, and we're going to review it today. It's Durham Charter Section 94.2, and if you're ever curious where the charter is, it's in the front of the Code of Ordinances, and all of our charter authority is listed there. Well, most of it is. One area of law that I haven't put on this slide, but does come up a lot in the affordable housing context, specifically when developers sue local governments, are Fifth Amendment takings claims under the U.S. Constitution. And what a claim like that says is a developer may sue a city and say, hey, you required this of me, and you're not allowed to under the Constitution because you're taking my property. And there's a couple of principles under Fifth Amendment takings law. The first is nexus. Bottom line is whatever the regulation is, it has to be the regulation that you're imposing on the development, it has to solve a problem that the development actually caused. So that's nexus. And then the other thing is rough proportionality. And that is that the regulatory requirement should be roughly proportional to the injury or damage that the development required. And so a lot of times when developers sue local governments for regulations like a mandatory inclusionary zoning ordinance, they will include a Fifth Amendment takings claim. So let's look at what the legislature has said cities can regulate through its planning ordinances, and this is in GS 160D 702. These are things that matter to the way the streetscape looks and things like that. They're not that helpful in terms of affordable housing. We're allowed through our UDO to regulate the height and size of buildings, how much of an individual lot is occupied by a structure, size of yard, so like what is the front setback, side yard setbacks, rear yard setbacks, density, the uses of buildings and land, street and right-of-way dedication requirements. So if there's a new development, what should the streets look like, and recreational space requirements. You'll notice that there's nothing in that list that looks remotely like allowing a local government to regulate the ownership or the rents charged on property. So that's just, keeping in mind strictly construing statutory authority. I think the North Carolina Supreme Court would look at that statute pretty closely. Okay, so in light of this statute, is inclusionary zoning authorized? And I never like it when people use words and it's not clear to everyone in the room, what are we talking about? So mandatory inclusionary zoning, and I've written down a definition, mandatory inclusionary zoning requirements are those that require, it's not voluntary, require the inclusion of affordable housing units or a payment in lieu of providing affordable units in new development. So that's what I mean for purposes of our conversation. What does mandatory inclusionary zoning mean? So then the first question is that authorized under 160D 702? I think the answer to that question is no. I'm a little disappointed that former mayor and former Senator Wib Gully left the room because I'm actually about to talk about a piece of legislation that he tried to get adopted when he was a senator in 2001, and Democrats had more control back then. And he sponsored legislation. It was SB 1001, and it was introduced in 2001. And it would have been a statewide bill that would have allowed local governments to do mandatory inclusionary zoning. And I really would love to talk to Senator Gully about that at some point, because all I've ever been able to know about it is the legislative history on the General Assembly's website. It never made it out of the first committee. And I don't know if you ever look at bills, but generally, bills before they get voted on go through a number of different committees, and then they get referred to the Senate for full vote, House. It never made it out of the first committee. The very next legislative session, Senator Kennard from Orange County tried to get special legislation approved just for the town of Carrboro. And best I can tell, Senator Kennard took the language from Senator Gully's bill and had it just apply to Carrboro. And that's called special legislation. And that would have been a charter provision that would be in Carrboro's charter. It did not make it, it was not approved. And so There have been attempts in the legislature to get mandatory inclusionary zoning authority, and they haven't made it very far. As far as I know, there have been no other bills introduced since 2001, 2002. So the bottom line is, under North Carolina law, there is no statutory authority to engage in mandatory inclusionary zoning. Okay, I think the rent control statute also matters for purposes of this conversation, and clearly it would come up in any litigation. So what does GS 42-14.1 say? It's pretty clear language. It says a city may only control rents charged on either residential or commercial properties, and it gives 3 specific times. First, if the city has an ownership interest in the property, say, for example, the police headquarters, that's property that the city owns. Bullet point 2, the city is actually subsidizing rent, so we're giving money to tenants, and then we have a contract with the owner that says the owner of the building will control the rents because we're subsidizing it. So that's a situation. Or a property that has been subsidized with community development block grants. So under North Carolina law, those are the 3 times we are allowed to control rents. Okay, so the next source of authority that I'd like to review is the Affordable Housing Charter Authority that Durham has. And we're sort of unique to have this. It's actually good. And so what does it say? It says that the city of Durham is authorized to incentivize. And that word is important because required wasn't used. And there's another town where that word actually mattered. The town wanted required, but the legislature said no. And their language is the same. It says incentivize. Do you have a question?
Is it Chapel Hill?
Correct. And just so you know, I was going to get to that. Their charter authority is pretty similar. It allows it under similar circumstances to ours, but it is my understanding that when Chapel Hill sought that charter authority, the then mayor of Chapel Hill actually went to their legislator and said, hey, it uses language like incentivize. We really wanted it to say required. It doesn't say, the adopted charter authority does not say required. So we're authorized to incentivize the development of affordable housing by either providing density bonuses, and I think you all know our Unified Development Ordinance does that. We offer density bonuses in the Unified Development Ordinances. And then the other phrase, I think, is something that has not been fully explored by the city. Not that staff hasn't, there have been efforts to look at this, but if the city offered other incentives of value, and obviously it has to be of value to the developer. So other than the density bonuses, we could incentivize the development of affordable housing by providing other incentives of value. And just so you know, when we get to the hopeful slide, my last slide, I actually mentioned, so what are some of those things that could be explored as other incentives of value to try to incentivize the development of affordable housing? And just, you know, my note there is the voluntary language used by the legislature. Like I said, Chapel Hill's charter authority is no more powerful than Durham's. It's very similar. I'll also add, our office, I in particular, about 5 years ago, all of the development statutes were reorganized by the legislature. They were taken out of Chapter 160A, and they were placed into a new chapter, 160D, right after 160A. And as part of that process, there was a faculty member from the School of Government that was on the committee that was doing the rewrite. His name is David Owens. And I found this really, I participated in several meetings through the North Carolina Bar Association related to the proposed changes. And I was at one of those meetings, and Professor Owen said at that meeting that when he initially put 160D together, he looked at Durham's Charter Authority on affordable housing, and he thought it looked really good, and he thought, why shouldn't this be applicable across the state? Well, I just, as a further caution and that folks keep eyes on things like this, the North Carolina Home Builders Association insisted that language be taken out of 160D. So there was an effort to give everyone in the state the authority that Durham has, and the North Carolina Home Builders Association was not in support of that, and it didn't make it into the final version of 160D that's in law today. Finally, and this is just a word of caution, and I think you're all familiar with this statute. Bottom line is what GS 6-21.7 says is if someone were to sue the city and a court found that the city exceeded its statutory authority, then that party is entitled to its attorney's fees and costs. And I'll just add that provision was added and has been bolstered over the last 10 years. So our current legislature is responsible for that language. Okay, so now we're at the last slide, and I'm pretty sure you're going to say, Don, this is a dud. It's not really what you promised, but I did try to summarize all of the tools that I know of that are available to the city of Durham to try to incentivize affordable housing. And I actually was covering for Kim at one meeting, and a council member leaned over to me and said, can we do this in this particular situation? Another council member was asking, why can't there be affordable housing in this development? And the council member leaned over to me and said, can we do this? And I said, yes. And this first bullet point is the explanation for that. When the city, I shouldn't say we, when the city is involved in arm's length contractual negotiations with developers, a developer wants to build something in downtown Durham, they need a property right from us, there's a variety of things they could need from us. When we are negotiating that contract, council is free to approve the contract or not approve the contract. It's council's choice. Just like when you're selling your own personal house, do you like the buyer's offer? It's the same kind of situation. And so I just wanted to put in your minds, where has this come up, just so you're familiar with the various circumstances where we've done this. There's a building on Hunt Street called the Brannan. It's a condominium building. There was a voluntary proffer from the developer. They needed certain property rights from the city to make their development happen. There was a proffer for affordable housing. And I'm pretty sure, I was at the work session, and I think council may have said, you know what, we think that proffer needs to be boosted up a little. That can happen. Foster on the Park, the apartment building right on the park, that was another situation. Developer needed certain property rights in order to build their apartment building. There was an affordable housing proffer that was part of that deal. The Vega condos also on Hunt Street. You'll notice there's a theme here. It's development downtown, and they frequently need property rights in order to make their developments happen. 949 Washington Street, the old Brain building on Washington Street, there was an affordable housing proffer there. This is a potential project, but the city center project, that, there could be a request that there be some kind of affordable housing proffer. And like I said, arm's length, contractual negotiations, and just so you know, I think staff frequently engages in those conversations with developers where we say, we think council is very interested in affordable housing. If you want this deal approved, it might be in your interest to make an affordable housing proffer. I'm frequently part of those conversations. So that's item one. where there's an arm's length contractual negotiation, and usually it involves a developer wanting some property interest from the city. Second bullet point, development that actually uses city property and/or city money, and I think everyone's familiar with this. That's where we're doing the project, Willard Street, South Side. I know council is familiar with this, and I know that recently there was a development over on Carver Street that made an excellent affordable housing proffer. So voluntarily proffered development plan committed to elements. There's a lot of words there. So when you are reviewing an agenda item and you see that the proposed rezoning includes a development plan, again, Durham is unique. No other city in the state has development plans. And what's unique about a development plan is developers proffer what are called committed elements, and those become obligations under the zoning. So that is another setting in which developers they can voluntarily make proffers that are related to affordable housing, and we've seen a number of those in Durham. The fourth point, the statutory development agreement, and the biggest example of this, well, it's the only one that's been adopted so far, Farrington Affordable Housing. That was a pretty remarkable deal, I think, because what the development agreement statutes allow is a city can negotiate with a developer, and maybe this developer needs something different in order to make their market rate project work. And in that particular case, they wanted more density for their market rate project. And it didn't fit under the density bonus for a variety of reasons that I won't go into here. And so planning and we really put our heads together and said, what is another tool we could use to make this work? And we said statutory development agreements. Interestingly enough, we prohibited statutory development agreements before this project. But after this, the first step was to get UDO text changes to allow the use of statutory development agreements and to implement the rules that would allow them. And what we were able to do in that agreement, what council was able to do since you all approved it, is it gave the market rate part of the project the increased density that they wanted. And they are constructing 82 units of affordable housing in an area where there is very little affordable housing. So that's another tool that Durham has used. And then the final bullet point is, and this is going back to our charter authority, you know, what it says is we can incentivize using either density bonuses or other incentives of value. So what are incentives that a developer might potentially want? And, you know, I sort of thought about that. Potentially there are areas of regulatory relief that can be offered, whether it's in the planning context. It couldn't be the inspections context because that's the state building code. But maybe there are areas of regulatory relief that could be offered. Another thing that developers frequently want is expedited consideration. Potentially, there could be assistance from the city with development fees. And I would caution, we can't just waive fees. This might, and I hope Manager Page doesn't get excited at me, all of this would need to be vetted. But I think city funds would need to be allocated to implement some of that. Like if we were gonna, you can't just waive fees, but potentially there could be grants for fees. And so that would need to come from the general fund. There are just a variety of areas that could be explored with the manager's office and staff to offer other incentives of value.
And
that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Attorney O'Toole. I've been waiting for your presentation, and as usual, you delivered. And that was the highlight of my question is, where do you think we can dig into incentives of value to try to flesh that out a little bit more? That sounds like the catch-all provision that's a part of the statute, so.
And you know what I would say,
interested in
Mayor?
knowing
It's
how.
whatever would induce a developer to give us affordable units. And so I think that would be interesting to explore with staff, with the development community. You know, what would you want to see? And then we could explore whether we could actually do that. But I don't know that we've ever, there have been attempts, please don't get me wrong, but I don't know that we've ever fully vetted out what we could do under that charter authority provision.
Do you have, because I know you're a deep thinker, do you have a maybe, or could think about a suggested process for that, for exploring?
I would be happy to work with the manager's office and staff on doing that.
Okay. Thank you. That's great.
Thank you. Thank you, Dawn, for the presentation. Councilmember Holsey-Hyman?
I just, very interesting. Is there, and I know you gave us examples, but is there any way you can kind of take the slide and give us examples under that I can, like we can have, you know, different ways that we can actually tap into these different.
So with these tools, so I tried to do that. You know, the first one, I gave all the examples that I knew of, where we were engaged in arm's length contractual negotiations, and those developers actually made proffers. You know, in that slide, the proffers were all financial. But, I mean, and it wasn't a proffer because it was a contractual negotiation, but the affordable housing component was a financial donation, but it could be units. Then, you know, developments that used city property or city money, I gave the two that are most recent and that I'm familiar with. The Willard Street Apartments near Durham Station, and then the Southside development. Voluntarily proffered development plan commitments, there's a bunch of those, because I think council is aware, frequently you get donations to the Affordable Housing Fund. And then there was that recent development, and I think it was called Carter Street Assemblage, where they actually are building, well, they are making lots through like the foundation, and then they're giving them to Habitat for Humanity for them to complete the houses. I mean, I thought that was a pretty amazing proffer. So that's an example of kinds of voluntary proffers that you can get through development plan rezonings. And then statutory development agreements, Farrington Affordable Housing is the only one that we've done to date. But believe me, when planning and I talk to developers, we're always keeping in mind that there is this statutory development agreement tool that we can maybe use. I can't mention the development because it's a very preliminary, but Fred Lamar and I actually were talking to a developer downtown today, and we actually talked about, well, maybe the statutory development is a way of facilitating you getting what you need and maybe you providing some actual affordable housing units. So those conversations do go on all the time. And then the last one, other incentives of value, I am not aware of us doing that. We do offer the affordable housing density bonus in the UDO, and I know that planning has tried to make that as appealing to developers as possible. It's been revised over the year. We have actually had people take advantage of it recently, but as far as the other incentives of value, I think that's an area worth exploring.
I think this is helpful. A lot of times I'm sitting here very quiet because I'm just processing and I have ideas in my brain, but I don't want to say it because I don't want to get sued. So this really helps me to be able to process. I know when I have my one-on-ones, I'm always just like, that's a good question. I don't really want to say it in this form because I'm, you know, still figuring out what I can say, what I can't say. So, I'm thinking about what I would like to ask or what I want to see. But again, I know I can't say certain things or ask for certain things. So this helps.
And that's what's interesting about these different tools. The first one, the contractual negotiations, you're pretty much free to say what you want in that conversation because you're a property owner, and if the deal isn't good enough, you can say that. In a rezoning context, I think you need to be a little more careful. More caution needs to be exercised because we can only accept voluntary proffers. They can't be forced proffers.
And I think I've asked before, like, is there a rubric to how they give, and I was told no, so. In terms of how much they can say that they're going to give to the Affordable Housing Fund, how do they come up with that number? I was asking that, one-on-one one time, so it's really no rubric to that, so.
Thank you. Manager Page?
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, Attorney, for this wonderful presentation. I am very intrigued with the other incentives of value under the city's charter authority as we think about innovative ways to get more than what we currently are getting in terms of partnerships with our private sector developers. I heard you mention, regulatory relief. I heard you mention, expedited review. My main question about the intent of this provision that we have is where do the conversations around those incentives take place from your perspective? The rest of these, we have done them before, and we are pretty sure of who has the conversations and where the negotiations take place. I'm just wondering if you have just general information at this point about what was intended when that was put into the UDO.
Well, it's in the charter. The other incentives, so that's in the charter. I think all that did was give the city leeway as far as how could it incentivize affordable housing. And so fortunately for us, the legislature said you could give density bonuses, and the words are other incentives of value. And so as long as it's legal, like, for example, we cannot waive state building code requirements. That would not be an incentive that we could offer someone. But if we, and I do not want to get ahead of the manager's office, but if there was grants for application fees, if your development is going to include affordable housing, then the city will pay the development application fees. That is an incentive of value that could be offered. Sarah and I were talking just before, Sarah Young, I'm sorry, the planning director, expedited review. If the city designated staff, so they're paying for this staff, to do expedited review for projects that include affordable housing, that's an incentive of value that I think would be legal under the charter.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Councilmember Caballero, and thank you so much for this presentation. I was really, really looking forward to it. Very, very quickly, firstly, as part of my work with the North Carolina League of Municipalities, we're planning to try and use our legislative muscle to codify this for the rest of the state, municipalities around the state. So hopefully we'll see how that works out. Two, I had a really interesting conversation about the language incentives of value with a colleague from across the aisle, another municipality member of the legislature, who said this was actually kind of a wink to cities that, okay, we're not going to give you compulsory power, but if you want to engage in a marketplace, and you're free to do it. And examples that one of the things I said, a developer, like if we own a lot of cars, a developer, hey, you want a fire truck for affordable housing? Chances are they're not going to want anything from our fleet. And what it usually comes down to, and this legislator told me, is that there's nothing excites the land developer like more land. easements or for example, if we said we'll give you part of 505 West Chapel Hill to do parking for your employees, that's a thing of value. That's an actual market commodity that we as a city, if we want to put our money where our mouths is, could give pieces of our land away, which we kind of do. We did at Willard Street, but we developed it. But if we want to say to a developer, you can choose a fire truck, a surplus police car, because you can sell that, or here's some land for parking, or here's, and that's usually what it comes down to. And the folk who put this language in there knew what they were doing. So in other words, it was almost not like a joke, but what he was saying is, we're going to force you to act like a market player. You can't just tell folk to give you something without giving them something, and we'll leave it up to you to come up with whatever is of value. Whether you own staplers, you own computers, you own a lot of stuff as a city, you got to barter, you got to make an exchange of value. So,
well, and to be clear, I think that's the first bullet point that I had up, arm's length contractual negotiations.
It's redundant.
If someone wants something the city has, we can enter into a contractual negotiation.
And that was
do that.
Right, and that was the joke. He was kind of like, that was kind of like the wink wink that the legislator on the other side of the aisle was saying to me, that, it's basically another way of saying you got to give to get. But we're not going to allow you to just order them to do it. You've got to make them whole. And that's basically, what it came down to. The final question I had, and I think you've already touched on it, the differentiation between arm's length contractual negotiation and a public hearing for rezoning or annexation. If there is, and kind of a nuanced, because I think sometimes, it's tempting to get into contractual negotiations during an annexation hearing or rezoning hearing. And what are the lanes and the differentiation, albeit maybe nuanced or perhaps even stark, between the two?
So what I would say is, when property is in the process of being, you annex and then you immediately zone. Otherwise, it's a free-for-all. Land without zoning after 60 days, a developer could do whatever they wanted. That's why consolidated annexation items, there's that language in your staff report that says you need to zone this land right away, because it would be problematic if it was unzoned. The way, and we've discussed this, in a zoning hearing, you're limited by our general zoning authority. And so I think council is free to raise questions and concerns that you have about development. I think it is a perfectly acceptable question to say to an applicant, are you planning to include any element of affordable housing? In a land use approval setting, what I would say to council is, listen to the answer. If you're satisfied with the answer, approve the rezoning. If you're not satisfied with the answer, don't approve the rezoning. But a contractual negotiation where someone wants something from us, that's a more open-ended discussion.
To the mayor's point earlier and question, I think this is a really critical difference. By the time they get before us, I would imagine the time for contractual negotiation has passed. We're much more constrained, I would think. So is there some type of could we as a council say to our planning department, here's a menu of items that the council has determined that when you're in the negotiation stage, for example, if you're willing to do this, the council's willing to do this before you actually get, if that makes sense.
So let me be clear. Usually those contractual negotiations don't involve planning. And then the second thing I want to say is staff and the attorney's office don't do that in a vacuum. It is brought to the manager's office. Given the complexity, sensitivity of it, sometimes the manager says, you know what, you need to go back to the developer. I don't think this is sufficient. Sometimes the manager says, you need to present this deal to council and let them provide feedback. And that's happened. I was familiar with it happening it was the Vega. I remember it very clearly. A presentation was done at a work session. It wasn't on for a Monday night meeting. It was just a presentation. And I remember council saying to the developer, you need to up the ante. There needs to be more. And that, again, that wasn't a rezoning. That was a request to use city property. And so with the manager's guidance, we get council's feedback in different ways. I think you'll recall the city center discussion. That's an example of a presentation without really an item for approval. What do you think about this? And I think your input was heard by staff and by the manager's office.
Thank you.
Is that clear?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Councilmember.
Thank you. I'm looking, okay, Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Madam Councilwoman. I just had a quick question and a couple of other follow-ups. When you're talking about the Fifth Amendment taking, I just wanted to note if causal contribution was included in that. So you're saying like it has to actually cause, but if it's a causal contribution, is that included?
And Councilmember Freeman, we actually, at a Monday night city council meeting, but it was before I think any of you were on council, maybe some of you were on council. It was a project down on Irwin Road, and it was a commercial development. And a question was raised, I think even before the Monday night meeting, but a question was raised by someone in Durham, are you going to do anything for affordable housing? And I was present at that Monday night meeting, and I remember being amazed because the former dean of the UNC Law School came over to that meeting, and she made a Fifth Amendment takings argument to council. And her argument was, okay, we have this site, we're building more commercial, we're not displacing housing. And so she was arguing there was no nexus. And so if you deny our zoning request because we're not giving you enough affordable housing, that would be unconstitutional. Did what I said, was that clear?
Yes.
So nexus is if you require something, it has to be related to what the development caused.
And just to give context, I guess, even if you were to look at, I guess, the causal relationship of a development near, say, a 147 that creates gentrification, is there any element of that that we could pull back on that fifth?
And so what I would answer to that question is, I don't think the Fifth Amendment empowers us to do mandatory inclusionary zoning. It can definitely be used as an argument.
I got you. And then on the committed element side, I wanted to, just a note, like, I know one of my colleagues mentioned a kind of a tool. I was wondering if you could include like 20% affordable housing as a committed element, or donated land to affordable housing or to an affordable housing developer, or statutory development agreements for a child care center, or solar on a roof, or electric car hookups for every house. Like, I don't know that there's a limit, what the limit would be beyond whatever the council could come up with.
And so when you're talking about committed elements, again, that's part of a D plan rezoning, and that is done pursuant to charter authority. That has to be something that the developer proffers. So it's not something we could require, but if a developer proffered on-site childcare, affordable units, charging station, if they included that as a proffer, council would be free to accept that.
Thank you. And I also, on the incentives of values, I'm wondering, more than just a kind of a suggested process for exploring, if we might want to look at creating that type of menu around what X would be for regulatory relief, like a list, like that menu. Yeah, I think yeah, I want to say more, but I don't. because I don't want to give it all away. But I think it's important to just note, this is a great conversation to have, and I'm looking forward to seeing what that process will look like. But I want to make sure that it's not limited to the process. I want to actually make sure we are looking at like what it is we can actually be asking for proffers around.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Williams.
What, I'm still learning about this. How does a neighborhood, what is it called?
Neighborhood
Overlay,
protection
yeah.
overlay.
How does that play into this?
So, we've got a couple of neighborhood protection overlays in Durham. That's a neighborhood-initiated process, goes through planning, has to be approved by city council. Those are extra regulatory hurdles that people have in their neighborhood. So sometime, the last one was, is it Old West Durham? Yeah. That a lot of folks in the neighborhood really wanted that to be approved, but then there were some folks that spoke out vehemently against it because it wasn't going to allow them to do what they wanted to do with their property. So it's an extra layer of regulation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other colleagues? Okay, I have a couple of questions, or really, I really appreciated the presentation. When I looked at this a few nights ago, I was rather excited, especially around the incentive piece. Could we potentially, because I think there is interest, Dawn, I know I've emailed you about that issue. Could we potentially create, and you responded, you're like, I don't see any, any.
What was the suggestion?
The email was, could we create an alternative pipeline? Could we incentivize affordable housing through our planning process to route things? Because we know right now rezoning is around 18 months. And is there an opportunity to get that down to like 6 months, right? You're going to give us a thing, you get a lot less time, because we know time is money for our development community. So I am deeply interested in this, and I'm wondering if a few of us who are on JCCPC could potentially bring this back to a project there. We meet on November 30th. I will absolutely be happily, enthusiastically willing to bring it during just public comment. And I also could talk to the chair of JCCPC.
And I would add, Sarah Young, the planning director, is going to be doing a deep dive with you at a work session in about a month or so. And I know that she's thinking about these ideas.
And I will say that we have several developers, local developers. I ask folks on the regular, what can we do? What can we do? And that has predictability and helping with timeline. Those are the two things that folks have said consistently every time. And I think that honestly, maybe even 3 or 4 years ago, we didn't have the affordable development community that we have now. We didn't have the success stories that we have now, and we're getting really good at this. And so when I think about how many folks, I think about the Carver Street assemblage, that developer out of DC, they do have mandatory inclusionary zoning. Those folks know how to do this well, because they have to do it every day. So I think that there's some really important opportunities for us to start to dig in. And I know that there's several in our development community who are eager to meet this need. Thank you. Does anyone else have any other questions or comments? Madam Mayor?
Thank you all. I think that went well. Y'all think that went well today? We are going to continue it. At this time, I'll turn it over to our city clerk for our updates on boards and commissions.
Good afternoon, Council. We have a report for the nominations to the Council's appointed board, committee, and commissions. The Durham City County Appearance Commission, there were 2 appointments, Alva Horton and Mabel Amani McCrary. Safety and Wellness Task Force, representing justice-involved residents, Melissa Maleko. Recreation Advisory Commission, Michael Johnston. Citizens Advisory Commission, re-advertised that position. Durham Affordable Housing Implementation Committee, representing a member from the Citizens Advisory Committee, is Leah Eford. And finally, the Durham Board of Adjustment mayoral appointment, Sherrod Banks. And that's the end of the report.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Now turn to our manager to settle our agenda.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I do have a couple of questions before pronouncing what I believe is the agenda for the next meeting, and it is on 2 items. Item number 8 from our city attorney was to receive a presentation, and it was to select an option, either 1 or 2, but it did not have a recommendation for an option that would put us on the consent agenda. So we would either need to have that on GBA to discuss it at the time, or you would have a recommendation of one of those options on that Monday night.
Madam Manager, the city attorney's office does not have a recommendation of either of the reapportionment maps. We are going to be following up with some of the information that the council asked for today. So perhaps it makes sense to have it on GBA so that they can consider that additional information in the context of their decision-making.
Okay. All right, and the other was, there was a discussion on item number 23, and I wanted to ensure that those questions and follow-up information would be sufficient for the consent, or if you would like to have that on GBA, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem.
Madam Manager, I'm fine with having it on consent, and I will just look to the staff to send me that information for my own digesting, but we can put it on consent.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
So for the consent agenda, I have items 1 through 7 and items 9 through 12 and items 14 through 30, and agenda for general business agenda item 8 and GBA public hearings items 32 through 36.
All right, we're ready to entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
All right, that's been moved by Councilman Williams, seconded by Councilwoman Johnson. All those in favor, if you sign by saying aye.
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 All those opposed have the same right. Hearing none, it is 4:10. Is there anything else to claim our attention? Councilman Williams.
Really quick, just want to invite all the colleagues out tonight. I'm going to be putting on a concert with the Life Skills Foundation, and I'll be emceeing with P.D. Pablo, and a few other local artists. Jillian invited. But yeah, I welcome you guys to come out to help us support an organization that are supporting at-risk youth. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It is now 4:11. Board City Strong. We stand in adjournment.